D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Gamer Nation, and welcome to the Dice Ball Podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the GENESYS Role Playing Game by Fantasy Flight Games. Firstly, before we go any further, I'm going to have to apologise for my voice. I'm recovering from the flu, so I do apologise for that. But I'm also one of another who is also suffering from the same problem, but we'll get on to that in a tick. I'm GM Hooly, one of your hosts, and this episode we're going to talk to you about an overlooked aspect of the game, namely the environment. But before we get on to that, let me introduce you to my fellow hosts and friends, GM Huzz, GM Flano, and GM Darkfyre, aka Caitlin. How are we all tonight?
I'm doing okay.
Doing well.
Yeah, pretty good.
Very good. Martin, you're the one that's suffering from a little bit of the same, maybe the same virus?
Possibly, yeah, just a bit croaky at the moment.
That's what you get for making out.
You don't want to start those sort of rumours. Jeez.
It's not a rumour, there's
Hey,
video.
they're going to start. The virus is spreading.
That's it.
Very good. So, what's everybody been up to? Michael?
It's been a while since we last recorded.
It has been, thank you to a wonderful, wonderful fault with our mixer. That's the second time. Have to apologise to everybody for that, but maybe I should sort of look after it a little bit better. I don't know.
Well,
It is what it is.
It is.
yeah.
But as for what I've been up to, being aside from work, been playing a lot of tabletop games again, so miniature games. I've done a heap of Batman
Right.
miniature game recently. Getting back into that, getting ready for a tournament in a couple of months.
Oh, cool.
I've also stumbled across another game called Horizon Wars, and it's a really, really fun, 6 millimeter combined arms war game. It's very almost old manny, but quite modern and nice, which is fun.
Cool.
So it's given me a chance to finally find a game that I enjoy, that I can use all my BattleTech miniatures in. So
Nice.
yeah, that's basically all I've been doing. RPG wise, not much. It's been pretty quiet, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Martin, what about you? You've been unwell.
Yeah, everything's been on hold a bit at the moment, so I haven't played anything
Wow.
since the last time that we got together.
And
so-
you've been busy at work as well. So
Yeah.
I think work has gotten on top of us. Plus, we've been doing some other stuff. We'll talk about that in a tick. Caitlin, what about you?
It's perfect timing because I actually played for the first time in a little while yesterday, where I played a D&D campaign with one of our friends here,
Yep.
who set us up for a one-shot campaign with level 18 D&D characters, which
Good
was
Lord.
super fun to do. Yeah, but part of it was like I'm fairly new when it comes to D&D. I've played a game, but when it's starting from scratch, like I need a little help in knowing what's available and wanting to choose, and I came a little bit overwhelmed in what I was actually going to choose. So what I did was I let the dice decide what my character was going to be,
Right.
down to how many letters my name is going to have and which letters of the alphabet was going to be my name. I counted the species that you could have. I rolled a dice and ended up coming up with a moon elf, or moon high elf, I should say, who is a fighter duelist defender, which happened to work out quite well with what I was rolling. I thought I was going to get something completely random, but I ended up getting something quite well put together. Completely. Her name ended up being Ioku, which worked out well. I haven't thought I was going to get every single vowel when I was rolling that dice to get that. It's going to be pretty interesting how that was going to turn out, but it was a really fun exercise to kind of go through and just, I don't know what I'm going to pick out of these. Roll the dice and it told me. So I have a completely random character, which was really fun to put together.
So was that was that in like tables that you've got like a name generator in a table or something?
No, quite literally. I rolled a D10
Right.
And that was how many letters I was going to have in my name. And then because I had like a translation alphabet in the D&D player's manual.
Right.
And in that I rolled a D30 because one of my friends happens to have a D30.
Right.
And if and every single time I rolled that D30, if it happened to be over 25, then I didn't count it and I rolled again. But most of the time I rolled, and whatever number that die landed on was the letter of the alphabet that I was going to choose.
Wow.
Which is why I ended up getting Ioku, which was like EOIKU.
Wow.
Is what I ended up getting. So, but yeah, just completely random. But the other really cool side of it was that he allowed us to have one magical item, any weapon of our choice, any armor of our choice, or any of those types of things. And I managed to select a moonblade as my main weapon, and I ended up having 6 runes on it, so 6 completely different elements that I could add to this moonblade, and it was freaking awesome. I loved that sword, and completely randomized the stats on that as well. Like everything was totally random, but it was fun. And then we ended up playing that game yesterday. It only went for about 5 or so hours, but it was so much fun. And the way he described the settings, it was the first time he's ever run a D&D game as well, and he did
really?
such a good job. Yeah, the descriptions that he had of the Shadow Realm or Shadow Plane that we run. I'm sorry for everyone who is a D&D fan, and I'm completely butchering the descriptions on this. I'm sure there's plenty of places where you can provide your comments to how upset you are at this section of it. But he described it as we were like walking through with all these crows on the trees, and then the trees are like looked like they had almost been burnt, but at the top of the trees looked like there was smoke still coming from the ends of the roots. So, and then looks at the crows, and the crows are just staring at you as you're walking through, and then you notice that the crow's feet are like melted into the tree itself, which is why they're not moving and just staring at you. And I was like, this is so cool. I just loved it, and that was one of my highlights of it, is how he described that scene. So yeah, I just wanted to share that's like part of what I've been gaming. That's what I got. So much fun.
That's cool.
Yeah. What about you, Ian?
Well, basically, I've been doing a lot of listening to some podcasts, specifically Eric Stimple's Eberron Renewed.
Eberron?
And yeah, I'm sort of like up to, because I've been I started it and stopped it and started it and stopped it. But I've been powering through them now, like up to episode 47, which is about halfway, or a little bit less than halfway. And damn you, Eric! I've got this D&D bug again. And I didn't think that I would. And maybe it's more probably to do with the way that he runs it and the way that his players are. But yeah, thoroughly enjoying that. Went to Sydney recently, spent some time with the boy, went to the Star Wars exhibit, and then we popped into a place down there which is called Games Paradise. It's a little game shop. Spent far too much money on stuff, bought some dice for Ethan, bought some D&D stuff for me, easy to do. So that was a lot of fun. Got some Imperial Assault as well, which I was sort of a little bit behind in. Managed to get, what else did I manage to get to do? Gaming wise, not much other than a version of, with my normal Star Trek group, I have, we've sort of decided that Star Trek needs a little bit more research first before I run it again. So, but they still wanted to play something, so I got out Chris Witt's Forgotten series for Star Wars. So it's been a while since I played Star Wars, and they a lot of the players had never ever played it before and had an absolute blast and want to play even more. So that was really cool. It was good to get back into the chair of something I'm a little bit more familiar with now. And yeah, that was an absolute hoot. They didn't want to, we started at something like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and come about midnight, they were just going, can we finish? Can we do a little bit more? Can we do a little? So yes, they were very, very happy about that. But most of my time has been spent with the rest of my team, namely you guys, doing Night's Edge setting stuff. So that's been consuming a lot of my time. So that's pretty much all I've been up to. which is pretty much a lot.
We did have I come to think of it though, we did have a game.
Oh, we did. We played
Android.
Yes, Android
On the weekend,
Wow.
we were supposed to record, but the mixer blew up.
That's right.
But
That's right.
that didn't deter us. We played Android, and that was an eventful setting.
That was great.
Episode, I should say.
Yes.
A lot of stuff happened.
A lot of stuff happened. So much stuff happened. It's not funny. We sort of jam as much as we can into those sessions, that's for sure.
Yep.
But great game. Absolutely fantastic. Loving it.
Yeah.
Loving it.
What was your character doing, Martin? I can't explain it. I'm not that eloquent with words.
You played two characters at
I was
once?
playing two
And
characters at
You
once,
crazy
yeah.
person?
Well, it's not
Well,
just
it was-
two characters at once.
There was one of them was my rival that was impersonating me in a face swap.
Yes. Oh.
But then you ended up playing him while he was fighting another PC, because that PC had
Yes.
discovered through some crazy rolls that he was an impersonator.
Yeah, apparently my because I have there's a player that, or not a player, a character that absolutely detests mine, and apparently he knows me best.
He didn't hate you as much, so he knew it wasn't you.
Yeah, he every time he tried to roll to detect if it was me or not,
Yes.
he rolled a triumph.
Yep.
Wow.
With a handful of successes and advantages too. So-
on top of it.
And they weren't easy checks. They're like 2 red, 2 purple.
Yeah, this guy was an infiltrator. Like
yeah.
He was good at this. Yeah.
And Bill was just rolling a triumph.
Well, I was glad he did that, because I was scratching my head out how as to start tying all that up and get to the end of that road, and Bill did it all for me. So, all right, job's done.
See, I thought that could have gone on for ages.
well,
and
it could have.
It could have.
We'd had one of them in prison, and the other one who was like the bad guy was sort of helping us interrogate this guy, and could have. But Bill just like broke that completely.
It's still not an even situation, because Martin's in the body of his nemesis still.
Yes,
Those
that is
genes-
true.
It wasn't just a simple face swap. He's been totally gene sculpted.
Yeah.
So he's stuck in the body of his nemesis, but he can't reveal to the Yakuza where he comes from that he is he, because he is also wanted by Trimath.
Yeah.
So it's all a bit of a jumble.
It's and it's not just, like my nemesis. He is my character's fear. Like he absolutely loathes and detests this guy and is like terrified by him. And every morning he's waking up with this guy's face.
Oh,
Seeing
that'd
in the
be
mirror.
frightening.
He knows he's dead now, but
But no one else knows he's dead.
no one apart from you guys.
apart from the party, but everyone thinks that everyone thinks you're dead. Your old character's dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody thinks your old character's dead, but you're
And the
oh,
nemesis is still alive.
Bit of a mind
So the Yakuza still
mess.
want you.
Yeah. Although it's possible that they could find out through
Through various means.
through various means, because one of the other party members is a double agent apparently.
oh, yeah.
Daughter of
We don't know
Daughter
that.
of
Thank
the CEO of Titan Industries Banking, which is a consortium. No, sorry, is a corporation owned by Wayland.
Yeah.
And the players have just got into bed with Elizabeth Mills.
who
Yes.
I fear.
Well, everyone
But,
feels.
I call it a healthy relationship. So yeah, interesting stuff.
There's a lot of moving parts. I tried to explain it all to a mate the other day. I couldn't do it. They were so confused on so I don't know how it works, but it's working. I need one of those like flow charts.
You do. I mean, hey, look, I've managed to close up a couple of nets so that I don't have as many people I'm under the thumb of.
Well,
so-
you think that?
Well, okay. Well, okay. I think that.
No, the people you're still under the thumbs.
Right.
They're just not trying
But
to kill you
no,
anymore.
that's it. Well,
that's the difference.
That's again. I'm all about building healthy relationships.
The only person under the thumb of anymore is
Elizabeth.
no, you're still under the thumb of her.
Oh, God.
You're
Yes.
not under the thumb of Dexter anymore
Yes, that's true.
because you got Elizabeth to kill him.
Well-
And now Elizabeth's like, well, you owe me another favor, so you just transferred that debt.
Yeah, but at least it's all in the one. I'm all about consolidation.
You getting there? I'm sure listeners are very
very
confused
good.
right now.
Yes, very
They should just play Android and just
Indeed. All right. Well, that's enough about what we've been up to. So before we come any further, GM Darkfyre, what's our podcast of the week?
So, well, this week we spotlight the Story Told RPG podcast. The Story Told is a variety RPG podcast with tons of discussion, amazing author interviews, and a smidge of live play. In their latest episode, the player characters finally come together in one place and are joined by several other important people at Kai's dinner party. This is a fantastic live play series. You can learn more about this and many more podcasts on the D20 Radio Network by visiting www.d20radio.com.
Indeed. Storytold RPG podcast is the newest on the line of podcasts through the D20 Radio Network. So, yeah, check that out. It's pretty cool. Anyway, so we've got a lot of things to discuss this episode when we're talking about environment. So should we get into the heart of this discussion?
Huzz?
Oh, you mean core of the show?
Yeah.
I've just become numb to it now.
Right. Maybe I do, Huzz. Maybe I do. That's exactly what I mean. Core of the show. And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we take a deep dive into a topic concerning the GENESYS Role Playing Game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, tonight we've got a bit of a rugged topic for you, environments. Now, I know what you are all thinking. Environments aren't all that exciting. Well, it's all about how you use them, and so we want to show you all some really interesting ways to make the world around your PCs one of their most memorable adversaries. So without further delay, Flano, why don't you tell us about some of the types of environments we can come to expect in encounters?
Oh, well, it's almost a never-ending list.
It is.
I mean, your standard one that we talk about all the time is, a pit of lava.
A pit of lava, yes.
Yep, you just got to have the tightrope.
And cages.
And cages, yeah.
Yep.
And some of those, gladiatorial battens, so that you can duke it out.
Cool. Yep.
But, there's also things like snow, forest. The ocean is one of my favorites. Pirate battles on ships.
Of course.
Yep.
Yep.
The sky in Night's Edge.
Yes. Which part? Up or below?
Well,
is the question.
Yeah, there's a big question. You've got, things like dungeons, in the dark.
Yep.
Which we've talked about last
episode. Yeah, absolutely.
But, there's everything. Anything that you can imagine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's also important to note on some of those things is that it's really easy for us to visualize the environments of the world that we know. But part of that as well is that if you're putting players on different planets, the environment is not necessarily going to be the exact same as what we know here. Perhaps you're on a oxygen-dense, like extremely oxygen-dense kind of planet, or a planet that doesn't have enough oxygen. What does that look like? What does that feel like? So while you're thinking of snow, forest, ocean, or, just general what an environment within a building is like, you can also think of some of those different types of elements in terms of the very makeup of the planet that you're sending your players in.
Exactly. And to use Night's Edge as the example, going below the clouds, as was mentioned, it's a different world. And it's easy for us to say that, but you want your players to feel it.
Yep.
And that's what this episode is about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for those who are wanting to follow on at home, where we're getting a lot of our information from is from page 110 through to 112 of the GENESYS Core Rulebook, where they talk about all the different sorts of environments. So before we go any further, let's talk about very quickly. Now, I know that everybody can read at home, but let's just go through each of these sort of environmental effects. So I'll just list them quickly. So we've got concealment, which is talking about darkness and smoke and intervening terrain. We've got cover, difficult and impassable terrain, gravity, water and swimming, vacuum, fire, acid and corrosive atmospheres, suffocating and falling. Now, they're all the things that are going to happen to you in an environment.
Next session. This is what's going to happen if your DM listens to this.
All at once.
All at once. Everything at once.
In next Android setting, I have a fight which has every single one of these.
Really?
Yeah, it's going to be intense.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
I want this to happen.
So, yeah, that's a challenge for any GMs out there who want to run this.
Especially the fire and acid part in a vacuum. That's always fun. And zero gravity. So watch out for the acid balls and the fireballs.
Oh, yeah, that's terrifying.
Just talking about what you said before, Caitlin, about the like an oxygen-rich atmosphere for where everybody's basic. Well, fire in an oxygen-rich atmosphere. That's a disaster waiting to happen.
It's an explosive topic.
Oh dear. But can you imagine going to a world where there's a little bit too much helium in the air, and you're trying to intimidate people with a really high-pitched voice? That'd be really funny.
But wouldn't that be the standard, though?
Yeah,
it would be.
Well,
it would be if you talk too low, people would be like, "What's wrong?" But if you talk normally,
Yeah, but like everybody else, like all of the aliens that you're trying to intimidate or talk to or negotiate with, all of their bodies are adjusted to that much helium in the atmosphere. But it's just the humans who are talking all of a sudden. It's like rather than going, "And you shall die," it's like, "And you shall die."
And that's terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying.
I could be wrong, and I hate to be that person, but when you have extended helium exposure, the squeakiness goes away after.
Does it?
Yeah.
Well,
That's just
we talk about helium and how it may have a negative effect on coercion.
right.
We could go to a world that's full of hexafluoride, which is the opposite of helium, and it deepens your voice. It makes you sound like Satan. It's a real thing. YouTube it. It's the best. They should make hexafluoride balloons because it'll be all sorts of fun.
Do they sink instead of float?
Yeah, they do. It's heavy.
Wow.
It's heavy air.
Interesting. All right, so let's go through each one of these very quickly. So let's talk about concealment for a start. So concealment is basically, as I said before, it's darkness, smoke, intervening terrain. So anything that's going to sort of get sort of stuck in your way from, seeing something that could otherwise normally be seen. What's some of the things that you need to take into consideration when it comes to concealment? Mike?
I guess the best times concealment will come into play is any time someone needs to, as it's pretty self-explanatory. Anytime there's visual requirements, is it difficult for me to see my target? Is it any time where you might have to question when the validity of your perception to someone? I guess.
Yep.
A couple of examples that might be outside the box.
Yep, absolutely.
Steam baths.
Steam baths. That's cool.
Would be possibly difficult to see. Maybe one of the characters has been affected by some sort of drug that makes them see things or can't see clearly. Hallucinogens.
That's the word I was trying to say.
Yeah. That could be pumped into the air conditioning of a building or something. Tear gas.
Yep.
Tear gas is a perfect example because it's not necessarily, that intervening, whatever in the air. It's you can't see.
Yeah.
It's a bit of both.
Well, yeah. Capsaicin, pepper spray.
Pepper spray, straight in the eyes.
Yeah, there's all sorts of different things. I like the steam baths one though, and I can imagine this in like a Legend of the Five Rings game.
Yep.
Another thing as well, like for concealment, it doesn't necessarily have to be something like steam or pepper spray or whatever affecting you. It could also just be an environment where it's dense with terrain.
Yep.
Like you're fighting someone in a library. You're never going to get a clear line of sight in a library unless you deliberately spend the maneuvers to get a clear line of sight.
Yep.
So the GM can just say, well, while you're in this area, everything has two setbacks worth of concealment. Unless you make active maneuvers to chase your target down and get a line of sight.
Well, this is the intervening terrain. And you could say that you could spend a maneuver in this terrain in order to remove a setback.
But exactly. And often I think a lot of people, when they think intervening terrain, they assume it has to be something a player has to actively move to get to. But it could also be something that can be a passive thing that's always there.
Bamboo forests in your classic samurai films.
Exactly. So it can be anything like that. Players don't necessarily need to actively seek it. Just being in it can be enough to give them that intervening terrain bonus.
Long grass.
Long grass.
Yeah.
Oh,
Jungles.
Think The Mummy, like the classic one, not this trash new one.
I was actually legit going to use that as an example. in what I was thinking. I'm like, when's going to be the right time to bring up the mummy? So I am so glad, Martin. This is why we're friends.
Yep.
And I can appreciate that. Yeah. Because really, that is when you think about it, it also talks about the setbacks that even that little section talks about when it comes to concealment within the book. It talks about the boosts that some characters have, like some characters are adept in moving through those types of environments. So they actually have a boost. They are using that to their advantage. If they're going through stealth, they can use the concealment of the environment around them to give themselves boost on doing it. If they're not used to that environment, they get setbacks. So all of the soldiers that are walking through in the Mummy, I'm not going to, if you haven't seen it by now,
what
issues.
planet are you on?
But,
wait. This is your
but there
favorite.
are soldiers that are walking through it, so they're going to have setbacks. They don't know about that environment. They don't know they don't even know that there's even something in the grass. Where there are creatures that use those grass and are able to walk through these grass that is as tall as their characters' heads. Yep. They're able to use that. So there's a different way of using the boosts and setbacks depending on who is actually interacting with the environment and how they're interacting with their environment. Are they actually trying to use what that concealing environment is to their advantage, or is it actually something that is going to disadvantage them? Yeah. Which is all different things. Not all different types of environments can be a negative to a player.
It's all a matter of perspective.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Another good example of what you could do with an environment, talking about vehicle combat. You could have two, sailing galleons going at it, a choppy seas during a storm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the heavy rainfall adds 2 setback dice or cannon fire because they just can't range in.
Yep.
Another example is the Millennium Falcon asteroid chase in Empire Strikes Back.
Yep.
Instead of having to try and say, the Millennium Falcon has to move behind asteroid all the time, the GM can just say, well, there's always intervening asteroids in every shot. There's a chance an asteroid's going to block your shot.
Yep.
So there's going to be setback dice added to that. And going by what GM Caitlin just said, the Millennium Falcon or Han Solo would have gotten boosts to his piloting or stealth or whatever check he wanted to roll to hide the Falcon, because there is lots of places to hide a Falcon in an asteroid field.
Well, so just hopping on top of that, you mentioned the Falcon being able to hide itself within the asteroid field. But then the other side of it was moving through the asteroid field as well. And I think that talks to one of the later topics, which is moving through difficult terrain. Just because it can also be a concealing terrain, can also be a terrain that's difficult to move through, which is the exact example Mike just gave. Sure, you're able to hide yourself in the asteroid field, but then moving through it can actually be really difficult as well, which can add to the narrative and what's happening. Are you hiding on it, or are you trying to move through it? Is everyone else having the same difficulties? Yep. Like it's one of those ones where you can have a concealing environment that is also difficult terrain, or any of those, or a combination of all of these things.
Absolutely.
I'll go back to the library example again. Very similar thing to the asteroid. Yes, you're always going to have cover in that library, but because it's packed with shelves, you have to weave in and out of those shelves to move an equivalent distance.
Yep.
So just moving from point A to point B in a library will actually take you 2 maneuvers because you have to move through the shelves.
Unless you're a librarian and you have the nimble talent.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know your way around. Or just moving through IKEA. That's like impassable terrain because
I get lost in IKEA all the time.
I hate that store.
Yeah.
For that purpose alone.
Or if you're going to have me in that game and we're going to stick with the Mummy reference, I'm pretty sure any character that I play would be exactly like the Rachel Weisz character, where she just knocks down all of the shelves that she's going through. Chances are that'll be one of my roles that do that.
But see, another thing that you might want to consider as well with if we use the Falcon, that there's nothing wrong with flipping a story point and saying, hey, look, my character was actually born. If you'd not set that up already, you go, actually, my character was born in an asteroid field. Write that down on your character sheet very quickly. You've suddenly got, you might have a boost for any sort of environmental effects that are affected by asteroids for the encounter.
Yeah, you were your parents were miners in an asteroid field full of
No, they were mine knocks.
Yes. Oh, right. Weirdo.
Right.
But yeah, all right. Well, let's sort of jump cover for a tick, because cover's it's very close to concealment. But let's talk about difficult and impassable terrain.
I will add one thing.
Yes,
for cover,
right,
and generally concealment in general. Don't, as a GM, don't be afraid to let your players create new cover. Don't Don't go to efforts at describing every single feature. This might be fairly obvious advice for some people out there, but if you're new to the system, don't go to the effort of describing every single feature that might be in the area. Let players do that. Where a player goes, I want to run over to that pillar and dive behind and take cover. You may not have described that pillar, but if you're in a place where pillars make sense, sure, let them have it. And if it's really far-fetched, that's what the story points are for.
Yeah.
Like if you're in a back alley trying to escape someone or dive out of the way of an SMG, chances are there's going to be a dumpster in that back alleyway. But if the player, really wanted some solid cover, they could have a dump truck there, and that could be a story point flip. And they dive behind that truck and get two setback dice. So the attacker gets 2 setback dice for shooting at them.
Yep.
So don't be afraid to let the players as well. Don't be afraid to dress up a scene by adding elements to it, like cover and other bits and pieces.
Definitely. Something else as well to take into consideration is table 1.6 to 7. I think that's what it is, which is all about concealment. It's easy to get trapped into it's either 1 or 2 setback die. There is actually a third option to add 3 setback die to it. So, if you've got some really heavy, thick fog,
Like Silent Hill.
yes, like Silent Hill, heavy, thick fog, thick darkness, like complete darkness, like the dungeon that you were talking about the other day. I think one of our listeners mentioned that, you can have...
It's actually 3 setback.
Yeah, 3 setback rather than 2. So, something to take into consideration.
Just to mention about cover as well, and I don't think we mentioned it because cover works a little bit differently to concealment.
Yes.
Which just adds straight setback to whatever you're doing. Cover adds defense,
That's
which,
true.
as per the errata, is capped at 4.
Correct.
And won't stack with your armor.
Correct. But concealment and cover do stack.
Yes,
so if you're
correct.
behind a wall in a dark section of town, then you're looking at potential lots of setback.
You could have like
added
5.
to attacks against you.
5 setback or 6 setback
So-
or whatever. So, yeah.
Could we give an example of what a dice pool would look like with someone who is within cover, we'll say a decent cover, that also happens to have armor, and then with or without some kind of fog or mist, just so you kind of get the idea about how those rules actually look when it comes to actually rolling the dice.
So let's say we've got some infantry in a trench.
Yep.
And those infantry have 1 range defense because they've got a blade of armor.
They've got those trench coats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, the cover they're in, which is a trench, which is a prepared position, would give 2 bonus to their defense. Now, the defense of the cover and the defense of the armor don't stack with each other. So you take the highest of the 2 in this case. So their defense from any attacks before any concealment would be 2 setback dice. However,
They're fighting at night.
a night, it's a pitch black night.
No moon.
No moon. The enemy, don't have any way of removing the setback of night because it's World War I, for example. They're just firing blind into no man's land. So that's another 3 setback dice added to any checks made against those troops in the trench. So those troops in the trench are now sitting with 5 setback added to any attacks made to them. If my math serves me correctly.
I think
You
it
are
does.
correct. You're absolutely correct.
But that's a fairly, 2-dimensional example. Like there could be nightfall with, heavy fog. There could be lots of other aspects you add to it. There's raining. There's no reason we can't add further setback if the situation calls for it.
There's lava.
Exactly. Or the guys attacking the guys in the trench are under heavy artillery fire.
Yep.
That's another 2 setback dice I would add to that because not only the firing in the dark, making blind fire in the best of situations, but they're also having to do snap fires because there's a risk of their heads being removed if they poke their heads up over their positions.
All the intervening explosions and
Exactly.
whatever else. Yeah.
So there's lots and lots of situations. Lots of examples.
The
of
guns
that.
might also be inaccurate.
There's that too. And that'll add setback as well.
So you could end up having like lots more setback than. And if you want to know about setback, you can listen to our last episode.
But I think that's a good example of how just a few additions of environmental effects has immediately painted that scene. And everyone at the table now knows, okay, this is a pretty grim situation.
Yep.
Because those troops I'm attacking, they're really hard to hit. And Jesus, this artillery fire is making it much harder. And our crappy guns, man, we're not really going to hit these guys often. This is bad.
But that's why no one leaves the safety of the trenches.
Exactly.
Because moving on to the difficult terrain.
Well, except if you're Wonder Woman.
Yeah, well, this is...
Don't get me started on that.
But moving across that no man's land,
Right.
that's got to be some difficult terrain. And the mud and the rain and, the bodies. Mm-hmm. This is why you don't charge a trench.
Well, tell that to World War I generals.
Well, I mean, if you do it with enough people, I mean...
True.
You can pay the cost in lives.
We laugh, but that's exactly what they do.
Yep.
But trying to get across there is, it's going to be difficult terrain. So it's going to take you multiple maneuvers for every range band that you cross.
Yep.
And you're going to be stepping outside of that trench, which means you immediately lose the cover of that trench. So their difficulty to shoot you is going to be automatically losing a setback dice. They're no longer having to, you're up and you're much more presented. So they probably don't have to worry about the darkness as much when you're running at their face.
That's true.
So it immediately becomes easier to hit you, and you're moving slowly across that trench.
Which makes it real spooky. And personally, I love difficult terrain because I find difficult terrain really catches players off guard because they have this perfect plan of, I'll run across here, get into short range, do this, and win the fight. But the second you add difficult terrain, they're like, damn, because they have to spend 2 maneuvers in places where they don't have to spend 1 maneuver to move.
Yeah.
And that just slows down the entire dynamic of a fight and can give one side a massive advantage in certain situations, that trench being a perfect example.
Yeah.
Now, here's a question for you. Now, normally if you spend a story point to activate, to upgrade the check, could you be within your rights instead to sort of say that suddenly, like if it was a moonlit night, so, you weren't having darkness effects, but then all of a sudden you spend a story point and say that cloud cover just comes over to block out that light for a period of time. Would there be any problem with saying, because, an upgrade doesn't necessarily sort of equate to that? Could you then say that, okay, for this particular scene or this section until the next person's turn, that it does apply 3 setback die instead?
Well, that's the thing about setback. The story points are not just for upgrading. And I think a lot of players that remember that they're for implementing that
story effect.
Story effect.
Yep.
Story points.
Ooh.
That's
what they're called.
But points of story. Things like a cloud comes across the moon and blocks the lights, and now we've got we've got the cover of darkness.
Yeah. Yep.
But then just. Your storyteller's going to let you have that for a little bit, and then he's going to flip one back and say, the clouds move away while you're standing out in the middle of the field.
Or that's when rolls of despair, and that's when the clouds part. Or the enemy spotlights turn on, or some such.
You don't remove the cloud cover. Spotlight.
No, it's acid. It's cloud cover that happens to be full of acid rain.
Oh.
Agent Orange?
Oh, jeez.
But no, I was just going to mention that when you're talking about environments, it's really easy to try and think when it comes to concealment, difficult terrain, or any other types of things that we're going to talk about, is the physical movement and also fighting in these and thinking specifically about those 2 skill checks or encounters when you're dealing with environments. But it's really also important to consider that environments can affect multiple different skills and affect different talents that characters might have. So, for example, when we're talking about Silent Hill and you're describing and you've encountered this thick fog that just kind of sweeps over the entire town, right? You could easily have that fog influence a resilience check or a fear check, right? Or different sounds that characters are hearing going to Silent Hill, like just a simple sound that is deafening to a character can interrupt their ability to perceive things, could interrupt their ability to have fear checks, or not being able to see what's around them if they're trying to do an athletics checks, or if it is this thick fog that's coming over there, the stealth checks that the other characters might have. All of those things can easily be influenced by the environment that the PCs find themselves in. but also can add to what the characters and the players are feeling interacting with the environment that you've created, particularly when you're starting to look at those like fear checks and things like that.
Yeah.
Well,
The rain. Oh, yeah.
that pretty much leads on exactly to what I was going to say. I'm glad Caitlin mentioned fear, because adding to that, there's no reason we're talking about difficult terrain. There's also impassable terrain. So that fog that's rolling in down the street in Silent Hill is utterly terrifying, especially the silhouettes of things moving within it and the sounds of whispering, crying children coming from it as well. So you're not going to want to go in that fog.
No.
So that fog is ordinarily difficult terrain because you have to stumble your way through this fog and you just don't know where you're going. So the GM goes, okay.
Unless you flip a story point and crying children soothes your soul.
Well, there is
So
that.
you're like, oh,
There is
going
that.
into the fog.
But the GM could say, all right, I want you to make a discipline check for me, a fear check.
Yeah.
If you fail, you're going to treat that fog as impassable terrain.
Yeah.
Because you just can't go into it. Because that's not because it's physically impassable.
Yep.
It's a mental barrier for you, and you
Yeah.
just can't go in there.
That's
Absolutely.
cool.
And that's
great.
another way you could use environments to work on a more psychological level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it.
Going back to the German soldiers in the trenches
Yep.
for a moment as well. Like,
German soldiers' trenches in a Silent Hill situation.
Oh, good Lord.
Now we're talking.
Oh.
Now we're talking. Yeah. But, rain, cold, things like this all sap a man's will.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Your discipline checks are required.
discipline
definitely.
checks, yeah. That's going to change how they interact with each other
Yep.
because they're upset and angry. It can affect social checks. It can affect simply their ability to recover strain.
Yep.
Because I would apply a lot of these, as you say, mental penalties
Yeah.
to strain recovery rolls.
Yeah.
And anyone that's lived in Australia or any other hot tropical climate, or in Australia I say Queensland mostly, where it's always swampy in summer, it's being that hot and uncomfortable can really affect your mental decision making. So if a GM asks for a knowledge check to work something out, he might even add 1 or 2 setback or more depending on the situation. If it's hot and clammy and gross, try the GM like, well, because of this heat, the environmental effect here is, well, take 1 or 2 setback. And a simple bit of knowledge your character should know, they sort of muck up the information because they're not thinking straight, because they're just, they're uncomfortable.
And you could allow them to take another check later on.
Yeah.
Yep.
But
exactly.
the other thing to note is don't be too heavy-handed with this either.
Sure.
You should always be looking for ways to add setback, as we discussed last episode. You should always be looking for ways to add them to help drive the narrative, but you don't have to give them a bucket full every roll.
But it is important, though, to flavour your scenes.
Yes.
And I think that's the main emphasis of what we're trying to talk about here. It's very easy to put people in a scene and go, all right, this is the scene, and not think of any other effects or outgoing, like things going on around it. It's just easy to sort of forget about that. And once you sort of introduce a few of them, it sort of really helps, finalize it and give a better picture.
And also, if you're rolling any sort of, if you're rolling setback, it gives, as we've sort of explained in the last episode as well, is that if you're rolling those setback and they're coming up with threats and they're coming up with failures, when you're looking at the dice, that's going to tell you that the environment is having a big impact on that particular scene, that particular encounter.
And I think as well, as a little side note to listeners, as we're moving through these discussions of environments, it's really easy to get swept up in the rules that we're going to be talking about. That is in the book, right? You're going to add 2 setback to this and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So it's important when, as a GM, that whilst you have the technical side of things of what's going on, the way that you can describe environments to actually engage your players into that is almost just as important than knowing the type of setback to the environment that you've just described, right? So one of the really easy ways of you to consider, okay, how am I actually going to engage my players in whatever environment I've just dropped them into? And some of the easy ways is to think about is the different types of senses that old people have. What does it smell like? What does it feel like? What does the air feel like? What does the room around them feel like? Are you in a dripping dungeon? Are you in a really nice plush palace? What can the players hear? Is there something going on in the background? Is there something in the distance? Is there something up close? Is there something really loud? What can they see? Can they see anything? What are they thinking? Like, what has your characters just recently experienced that have just brought them in here that could impact the way that they're going to experience that environment? And just feeding some of those in can be really simple narrative descriptions of the environment that actually adds to the setbacks you're going to encounter later, what the players are going to interact with that environment, what are the players going to add to that environment. Just really simple things just to kind of think about when you're wanting to describe a scene in the terms of environment. And if you think of that, moving into each of the steps that we're going to talk about next, which is all the technical side of how to create those environments, but thinking about that narratively, it makes it a hell of a lot easier when you're talking about the nitty-gritty rules.
Yep.
And it's also worth extending to what Caitlin just said. Yep. The book provides some of these mechanical elements, but don't feel like you have to stick to just these. Be creative.
Yeah,
don't create your own effects.
I was about to say the exact same thing.
It's unlimited what you can do. Like if the players enter a dungeon, for example, that's has some sort of weird psychic mind nullifying creature, the environmental effect there could be everyone loses 1 rank in all their skills.
Another thing that can happen is don't be afraid to use qualities and things like that. If you're firing black powder weapons in the rain, maybe your powder's wet and you need to add extra inaccurate or
perfect. Just further inaccuracy.
More inaccuracy. Or prepare.
Well, they already got prepared for the black powder.
But it increases it by 1.
Increases by 1. Or you could also just say, hey, anytime you fire a black powder weapon in the rain, your check's upgraded once. And if you roll to spare, the black powder's done, and you have to repack the weapon, which will take an entire action.
Yeah.
So there's lots you can do when you start, especially if you're knowledgeable with the rules, you can start really implementing really interesting things that goes beyond what's written here.
Yeah.
So what they've got in page, as I said, 110 to 112 is the start. Go ahead and add more stuff. And some of the things that you guys have come up with are amazing.
Well, that's it. Don't something that we've talked about previously as well is don't be afraid of instead of adding setback, if it's something that would actively harm or hinder your player, like tightropes over lava.
Yep. Upgrade the check.
Upgrade the check. Yep. Which is what we've just said. If you've got you're at risk of running out of powder because it's wet. Upgrade it.
And tell your players ahead of time. This is most likely what will occur if you roll to spare when you're doing this thing with that weapon.
Yeah,
too much water has got into the weapon itself, and then you're going to have to spend that action to clear it or whatever. Yeah, absolutely.
Because no amount of talents that you've got to remove setback is going to prevent that effect from happening.
Correct. And once the players sort of know that threat's on the table, like despair's on the table, tell them first, and it makes every roll they make this sense of dread.
Yep.
There's so much you can do with it. The Silent Hill example, if you roll despair, the GM will say, well, if you roll despair in the situation for whatever reason, the chances are something's going to jump out of the fog and grab you, and the player then will have to worry about that every time they make any sort of check. Perception check. Oh, okay, upgraded once. There's that despair. You succeed. Awesome. But it's a shame that swarm of crying headless babies have emerged from the manhole and now dragging you down to hell. Right. So it's all bad. Right. And the player knows that before they go into making the roll, which is cool. Yep. And that's on top of every other setback that might be there as well. So it's just bad news.
So very, very good. Excellent.
But it could also be good news.
Yeah.
Like there is
in what world is crying headless
news, Caitlin?
Well, but you've just described it, how different types of environments and things like that can negatively impact. But what about if you've just had characters that have just gone through that, right? They've managed to survive that horrible encounter where something's just come out and grabbed them or whatever, and they have this sense of that they could almost get through anything.
Yep.
There is talents within Genesis and even talents with other people that have created that actually allow people to move through difficult terrain or are actually able to have that resilience of those types of mental things that impact them or any of those types of things. There's nothing to say that as a GM that you can't say, hey, this happened narratively previously, which means that you now all have the opportunity to use this talent the next encounter, right? Yep. Like there's different ways of using those talents and those boosts and things like that without necessarily always having to use upgrades or things like that. Accessing talents is a really different way of rewarding players or adversely impacting players if you're going to give those talents to some of the NPCs. I'm not going to judge, but just something different to consider when it's when you're thinking about how people are going to engage with the encounter that you're creating.
Well, that's it. Yeah, definitely design your NPCs for the environment as well. Going back to the mummy example, those little things crawling through the grass, they definitely had the ability to ignore difficult terrain, to be able to find their opponents easily and things like that. So,
and even if you're reskinning an existing NPC, if I'm a pro card,
don't be afraid.
If that creature doesn't have the ability to see in the night, but that creature quite clearly lives in the night or in the darkness, I should say. Just assume it can see in the darkness. Don't add the setback dice. It's that simple. Like I ran something not too long ago with the insects in a sewer. I was using the rats from Android.
Yep.
And they didn't have any dark vision, but these insects lived in sewers to clean the sewers out. So it makes sense they have perfect vision in the dark, or some sort of sensory system that they can see, they can make do in the dark. So I just assume these guys don't add any setback dice due to darkness.
Yep.
Simple as that. And it changed how those rats functioned 100% by adding that simple element that worked in their environment. And twofold, it really helped paint a picture of how those insects sort of would have acted and behaved. They're quite clearly a creature of the dark.
Yeah.
And it's like, we have setbacks when attacking these things, but they don't have setbacks for us. That's pretty brutal. It's what you can do.
Very good. One of the things just wanted to mention very quickly that we haven't touched base on is gear.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of gear that's out there that will add boost die to stuff, as well as removing setback die.
That's the most common two things they do when it comes to environments.
Yeah. So, if you've got, all-purpose goggles that can sort of see through the dark, it's going to remove setback die or completely remove them from the equation. So you're not affected. Or if you've got a sight, for example, it'll give a boost die, not necessarily removing setback die. So it does both.
And like the thing like a lantern, for example, it removes up to 2 setback dice from the darkness, but only up to a certain range. Up to short range is the furthest its light extends. So if an archer's firing at a creature beyond short range, the lantern bonus is lost.
Yeah.
And in fact, if I was the GM, I would say any creature attacking the group who has a light from the shadows is probably going to gain some boost dice to attack because they know exactly where the PCs are because they are holding a torch in the dark. So it's a two-way sort of street you have to be mindful of.
They probably don't even need to take the setback because their target's fully illuminated.
Well, I would probably in that case add just boost, but you can do it either way. Yeah. It works.
Yeah.
And something else that, like just going through for the stuff that we're doing for Night's Edge and just going through a lot more of, the finer details of Terranoth, there are pieces of equipment which are in there that give boost die or remove setback die for taking on environmental effects with making resilience checks, for example. So if you've got like cold weather gear, I think it is in one of them, that if you've got cold weather gear, that it allows you to remove setback die or gives you boost die, I can't remember which, to making resilience checks. That doesn't come up a lot. But if that's an environmental effect.
There's heaps of stuff in Star Wars that does that. Heaps of gear which does environmental effects.
We really should be using
it's super easy to transfer whatever is in Star Wars to Genesis as well. Like, there's nothing to say with the flip of a story point. Oh, you happen to open up a chest in the corner of the room and there's a weird looking coat thing and it just happens to have the same types of stats and effects that's in a cold weather gear in Star Wars or something like that, definitely. Different things. One of the other things I wanted to mention as well is, how we're talking about the lantern, right, when it comes to other people viewing them. And I don't know why. Actually, I do know why. I love my horror. But in terms of the environment and the effects on equipment to that, if you're in a horror setting and you have a light and then you roll a despair and that light tends to go out, you can always add a fear check on top of that with a setback now. Your gear's gone out. It's completely dark. Yeah. All that stuff is around you. There's so many different ways that you can make what is happening around, not just in the environment, impact what that player is feeling and going through that way, particularly even with gear. Like, that's a really cool way of using despairs, setbacks, story points, any of those types of stuff.
Great. Agreed. All right, so that's covered concealment, cover, and let's talk. Do you think we've really covered difficult and impassable terrain? I mean, I know that we've touched base on it.
I mean, we can talk about it a lot. I think it's a good example is don't be afraid to use it, because I think it's one of those things that gets forgotten about a fair bit. And it applies to vehicular combat too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Impassable doesn't always mean impassable. All it refers to there is that it's terrain that can't be gotten through by using maneuvers.
Yeah.
It could allow your players to get through it with an athletics check.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
So
it's up to the situation.
it's a barrier.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
with
With the zone rules.
With zone rules, it's impasse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like getting from one airship to another airship, for using Knight's Edge, for example, that would be impassable to anyone on foot.
Yep.
Yep.
However, if you had a griffin, if you could jump really far,
If you
or
had
some sort of-
wings or whatever.
you had a
Yep.
zip line, you had a way. If you had a way to get around that impassable feature, then sure. But that's going to come down to a situation by situation basis.
But just keep it in mind when
Yep.
you're designing the terrain that the players might find themselves in.
Yeah.
Using the failed fear check to make terrain impassable, dead man's, no man's land is a perfect example of it. In ordinary situations, that's just a stretch of ground. But when it's being shelled by artillery, the GM can say, "Well, you failed that discipline check. You're going to treat that as impassable terrain. You cannot get past it unless you can overcome your fear." And no amount of jumping, flying, athletics checks or anything like that's going to overcome that, because your character doesn't want to put itself in danger.
And that can also go down to like the reputation as well of an area. If you're if all of your characters have newly been assigned to the right flank, and this area between you and the enemies has got this reputation of being no one survives there. That could be right. Make your fear check straight away before you do anything.
Yeah, and it's daunting.
Yeah,
Well, that's
absolutely.
a perfect example of an impasse. If you in zones, if you want to get from one zone to another, the GM can say, "We have to cross that no man's land. Before you can do that, you have to make a discipline check.
Yeah.
Until you pass that, you can't get through."
Yep.
That's simple.
Yep.
Agreed. Very, very cool. All right, so that's pretty much covered difficult and impassable terrain. The only thing that we have to mention there, difficult terrain, is it costs 2 maneuvers to get across that. There are some talents which allow you to remove that. But if anybody wants to take a look at the ins and outs of that, that's on page 110. All right, so let's talk about gravity. The gravity of the situation. It's pretty heavy.
It is heavy.
It is a heavy topic.
That's what Marty McFly would say.
Right. Is there something wrong with the gravity in the future?
In the 1980s, yep. 1985.
Indeed. So what does gravity do, Michael?
Well, there was a man a while ago who worked that out by seeing an apple fall from a tree.
He did.
Before that, it's a very deep question you asked me there.
Before
It's
that,
still
it didn't
even just
exist.
A theory. Like,
Exactly.
let's be real.
Right. Yes.
And gravity doesn't exist if the Earth is flat, so who knows what it is.
This is true. Who knows? What is that?
I don't
How
know.
does?
It's
I don't understand.
it's a tricky one.
is.
But no, gravity essentially, it's as what it sounds. If you're in a location where the gravity is lighter, you're going to be able to move around easier. If it's heavier gravity,
Or harder.
Or harder, depending on what you wanted to.
Because
try to do.
what if you're out in zero gravity and you have nothing to hold on to
That's
or
true.
anything like that? And that's a horror setting in itself.
that's very true.
But
But yes,
Sorry.
you're right. What was I saying? If you're in a heavy location, it's going to be harder to do things. That's a general rule of thumb.
Yeah. Yep.
But it can get pretty involved. If you're in a place with stronger than normal gravity, the GM may add up to 3 setback dice to any brawn-based skill checks you may make.
Yep.
Except for resilience, because that's not really related to the gravity a whole lot, but it could be.
Yeah,
If you're
absolutely.
being crushed by gravity, it can suck sometimes, I suppose. Like, I mean, perfect example is the gravity, the G-force machines that NASA uses. You have to make essentially a resilience check not to pass out, and the more gravity being applied to you, the harder that check is to make.
I remember there was an old ride called the Gravitron. Do they still have the Gravitron? And just like it starts up and he's spitting around, whatever else,
And it presses you against the wall.
And it presses against the wall, and it always used to be fun to try to raise your hand. And
That's just me getting up in the morning, to be honest. I call mornings Gravitron.
But it does also mention
I so understand what you're talking about. There.
but it does also mention that this applies to coordination.
Yes.
which is an agility skill.
Yes, and that's down when that especially applies when it's weaker gravity, because it's easier to zip about as well. So the GM could add 3 boost dice to checks you make related to the gravity you're in.
Yep.
To brawn based skill checks and coordination.
Interesting. Now, what happens if if you're designing a race that is used to lower gravity?
Well, Loonies is a perfect example.
Loonies is a good example. So, how does that work? Do things when they're on normal gravity was then, if you've got a campaign and you're doing a lot of, going up into space, and then you're also doing an equal amount of on the ground, what sort of impacts is that going to have on your character? Something to think about as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's also worth mentioning as well in deep in the rules, because Caitlin mentioned zero gravity before. It says here in the rules that zero gravity doesn't apply any boost or setback dice to skill checks. Now, I would say yes, sure, in situations where you can actually grab onto things and move around inside of a spacecraft.
Yep.
But as Caitlin said, when you're in the void of space with no way to do anything, I reckon there might be a few setbacks.
Oh, yeah.
But chances are, if in the void of space, you're going to fail any athletics
more like
checks you make.
everything around you is an impassable terrain.
Yeah, exactly. But it's one, again, zero gravity is one of those situations where it can be, beneficial, average, or really, really bad, depending on where you are and what you're doing.
Well, look, there's obviously the movie Gravity is probably a good example of it. That and there was another movie that was similar to that.
Anti-Gravity.
recently. No, not Anti-Gravity. But it was a similar one where they're going across between different environments. And I'm trying to remember one of them, or it might have been a TV show.
Did you dream this?
No, I did not dream this. This was on Love, Robots, Death?
Sex, Love, and Robots.
Sex, Love, and Robots. There was the one where she...
Love that series.
There was that
People
one
should
where
watch that if they
basically
haven't.
she had to...
Cut off her
she
hand.
had to cut off her hand,
That was a
basically.
good episode. Yeah.
That was... that whole series is amazing.
Hashtag spoilers.
Hashtag spoilers.
Agree.
Sorry. But yeah, go and watch that series. Amazing.
Another good example is Interstellar.
Interstellar, yep. All sorts of things where they're having to go backwards and forwards to different places, and they've got zero gravity, and they've got to launch themselves. They have to make some sort of skill check to, give themselves some sort of way to get from point A to point B, because obviously, for every action and opposite reaction, whatever that theory is.
Every action there is an equal.
We are
opposite
going
reaction.
into areas I have no
Yeah,
expertise.
we're stumbling into dangerous territory. Where people are going to go, well, these guys are dumb.
But yeah, to the sort of... Sorry?
I did just quote it.
You did.
You're reading it from Google, Mum.
And
The look that just gave Michael then. Anyway, so...
It was full of admiration.
But those sorts of environments where you've got that sort of a scene, that's where you, there will be additional skill checks to be able to move from point A to point B.
Gravity can really, well, lack of gravity, or even lots of gravity, can really open itself up to diverse, unique situations that players are in. And that's Sex, Love, and Robots, the perfect example. Players having to think out of the box to try and get to somewhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really cool what you can do with that.
Indeed.
And immerse yourself, as GM Hooly just said, in things with lots of no gravity examples. And you'll get lots of ideas. And zero gravity, like we play a lot of Star Wars, but how often did zero gravity ever come up?
I don't think in any of our campaigns, and I know we were playing in with Dragon Squadron, where you're flying around in space.
it did. It came up in a few of our boarding actions. We stood on the front of a Star Destroyer at one point and blasted through the window. But we had mag boots.
That is
We
true.
always have a way to overcome it in Star Wars.
Yeah,
Star
there's
Wars
always
is
a way
way
to overcome it.
Yeah,
because Star Wars doesn't apply space physics to its space, so it never really became to
Just
be
like
a thing.
door physics.
Exactly, and sounds and space physics, but that's Star Wars because that's a different
Because of
galaxy.
it,
That's
yeah.
how it works.
But I haven't actually even sort of like
Bending
raised that
bolts.
much in different environments, different worlds that you've gone to.
Yeah.
Well,
gravity's a big thing.
gravity is a big thing, and I've never really played up on that. So
It's something to think about.
It's probably something you'd more consider definitely in hardest sci-fi games.
Because
Where it's a thing.
Star Wars is space opera. It's not sci-fi. I mean, it is, but it's
More space fantasy.
it's space fantasy, not space fiction.
Yep. So if you're playing like The Expanse or something like that,
Yeah.
a lot more of these rules will be coming up in a big way.
Because that's what it's about, right?
Yeah,
it's science fiction.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Right, so then we have water and swimming, which is always a big one. So when moving through water and swimming, it's going to be using things like athletics is your primary stat. So let's talk a little bit about that. Caitlin.
The main thing when I'm thinking visually of water and swimming is the scene from Alien Resurrection, right?
Right. Yep.
When they're swimming through underneath and they have the aliens coming up behind them and things like that. So as soon as you threw it to me, that's exactly what I think of visually.
Absolutely.
But it could be any type of water. It could be water that's up to your ankles that just happens to be extremely cold, or it could be water you're fully submerged. You have to swim. It could be water that's as big as an ocean. Like, there's lots of different ways to interpret water that affects the environment and affects the players that are in it. But particularly one of the key things that Genesis talks about when it comes to water is swimming is the threat of suffocation and the rules around how that would work when it comes to maybe not necessarily doing too well in that body of water. But I think that's part of one of the interesting things about how the different ways that water can actually impact is not just visually or physically, but also can cause some serious damage when there's a lot of it.
Absolutely.
It's also worth mentioning as well that swimming actually has some unique rules when it comes to moving through them. Generally speaking, if the water's fairly calm, it's just a maneuver to do so at difficult terrain.
Yep.
However, if the water's quite choppy, the GM may also then ask for an athletics check, costing an action to do so. So, because just like any action, anything you do in the game which you have to think about is an action, as a general rule of thumb. And swimming in choppy water, you have to think hard about that to stay afloat, to fight the currents, to not drown. That's a priority. So you're not going to be firing any weapons or attacking or doing anything like that. That's complex while you're trying to swim through such water. So action to do an athletics check to swim through water, that's pretty taxing to the players.
Yeah, absolutely.
That could cripple a group of players in some situations. And I know for a fact as a GM, I don't think I've ever had implemented water in any of my games. It's not one of those things that have really come up because I've never run a water-themed game. But if you're running a sailing game...
Waterworld.
Waterworld, yeah, that'd be awesome. Then swimming has to be a big part of it to be mindful of. And you could even introduce new talents. If you know your world's going to have lots of water, you could have talents like hold your breath longer underwater. That'd be useful.
I just had a thought for Night's Edge.
Right. Yes.
Not many people can swim unless you come from Lakeport.
That is true.
Well, it's like the old world. Not too long ago, swimming was a rarity for human society.
Yeah.
So it's like sailors in the 19th century and beyond, and further back. If you fell overboard, you're dead. They didn't know how to swim.
Yep.
Let's talk about people who, if we talk about Star Wars very quickly, let's talk about people who are from Tatooine, from Jakku, where there is no water, and then suddenly they crash land on a planet that is nothing but water.
Well,
there's nothing in the rules that says
that's narrative.
That it's a completely narrative thing to say, well, sorry, buddy, but you come from a desert world. You're going to take a couple of setback die or an upgrade to the check.
Probably an upgrade because there's some pretty bad things that can happen.
So if you
wouldn't be auto death, but
you could start to drown. You could, and that's, as Caitlin mentioned, that's sort of one of the core things that they talk about is what happens when you're submerged in water.
But could you imagine a situation like Caitlin used the Alien Resurrection scene as an example? If you're a party of people trying to make do, you got equipment hanging off you, you're having to swim through this water, and you can't do actions because you're in this terrible situation, but you do have these nightmarish aquatic creatures behind you that can do stuff.
Yeah.
You'll then have to make this choice of, do I swim to stay afloat and not drown, or do I
dump everything and
attack these creatures behind me?
Yeah.
And in some of the scenes in Alien Resurrection, they do take the shots underwater, but when they're doing so, they're not swimming.
No.
They're spinning around submersed and taking those shots at the xenomorphs that are having no trouble at all swimming through the water to kill them. And that turns a fairly mundane situation to a terrifying one.
Yep.
Because the players, if they have to spend actions to get away from these things, can't do a lot of the things. As I said before, including talents.
Sight becomes a major thing. Like, I don't know if you've ever been underwater and sort of tried to set... I know that in the movies, people seem to see quite clearly in water. For me, I go underwater and I can't see anything, you know. I mean, it's a blur, but just in a swimming pool, if duck my head under the water, the whole thing's a blur.
Well, that's where concealment would apply. You could apply concealment to water, especially if it's muddy water like a swamp.
Yep.
Then you're looking 3 setback dice to do anything that's attacking that crocodile or xenomorph that's nipping at your heels.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I know other people that because of the refraction rate of their eyes or whatever else, put them underwater, they see as clear as day. It's weird. But anyway. Yeah. So these are the sorts of things that, you know, you could be saying, well, this is what my character does. And, you know, to add to that scene with, I know I keep going back to, you know, my contribution is story points, but story points can play a massive role in how your characters deal with certain environments.
Yep.
So,
that's what they're there for.
So, yeah. The other thing to take into consideration when it comes to suffocation, and this will also apply to vacuums as well, is that a character can hold their breath for a number of rounds equal to their brawn characteristic.
Yes.
And then after that, you need to start taking sort of some damage or start making...
you will take damage no matter what. As soon as you're exposed to vacuum, you immediately start taking damage, I'm pretty certain.
No, it says you can hold your
Furthermore,
breath.
during each round in which the character is exposed to vacuum, they also suffer 3 wounds.
Ooh.
So vacuum sucks.
It does.
You can hold your breath all day,
Yeah.
but doesn't change the fact your skin is turning to frozen glass.
That's right.
True.
And your blood vessels are trying to erupt from your eyes. That's the wound. And no, it's wounds. It's not damage.
Yeah.
And which we'll cover later when we talk about fire, acid, and other corrosive
absolutely.
atmospheres.
Yep.
That's straight wounds. That's not applying your soak. So you can be the toughest, burliest thing around, but vacuum doesn't care. If you're not in a spacesuit, you're going to die real quick.
Yeah, and once you run out of wounds, you take a crit, and then every round you take more damage, you take more crits.
Well, you know what it gets
You will die eventually.
And if you start suffocating, you're additionally taking 3 strain
Right.
per round, which is on the next page.
Yep. Well, you know what you can't do when you're unconscious? Hold your breath.
That is true. So, yes. So,
this is something as well. So you die even faster because you take crits from the wounds that you're taking, but suffocation says that once you exceed your strain threshold, you start taking crits from every time you take strain damage.
Will be
so you'll be
10.
getting 2 crits every round, and the second one every round is going to have an additional plus 10 stacking infinitely.
It's like spacesuits were invented for a reason or something. Weird. But again, that's another awesome horror element because there's nothing more terrifying than
not being able to breathe.
Well, just the vacuum of space because when you're on a spaceship, that's what makes Alien such a great horror movie. It's because when you're in a ship in the middle of nowhere, there is no escape. No. You can't just walk outdoors and get away from this thing. No. And that's why the vacuum of space should be brutal.
Yeah.
And honestly, if I was running a game where I wanted vacuum to be as brutal as it should be, I would make those rules much more scary. But them as they are printed up is scary enough alone.
I think they're pretty good because you take 3.
Oh, it's good.
3 wounds, 3 strain. It gives enough time for the players to try and do something about it. But if you want to make it more lethal, as you say,
you absolutely can
double it.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of things you can do, and that just adds to the terror of it.
Yep,
which is awesome. And again, the psychological thing we've seen in the movies where a person jumps from ship to ship and they hold their breath for a few seconds while they're covered with a thermal blanket. You could have that player make a discipline check to see if they even have the will to do that because no one wants to jump out of the vacuum of space. And if they fail that check, they might not make that jump. You know, it's lots of things you can do there.
I always love the scenes, like in The Expanse where they get a hole in their suit and then they've got to panic and then they start running out of oxygen and then they start making those checks for suffocation.
Yep.
That adds just such a...
The whole notion of making a fear check or whatever else to do something. There's... what was that movie? Contagion? Where they're up in space and they've managed to bring back this sort of microorganism and then it gets stuck into people and they have to sort of escape between places. And one of them just couldn't do it. Just couldn't bring themselves to to escape. I might be getting my movies mixed up, but, making that fear check, it becomes that impassable terrain to be able to go from there, not only from a physical sense, but the psychological sense. And that can just add so much element to, or, such a strong fear element to the scene. That's,
You have to be careful though in situations, because I think it's an awesome use of discipline checks, but you also got to be careful to take away total player agency.
Yeah,
so it's a fine line between the two, because you don't want one check to be their instant death, which in some of these cases it could be. You have to jump from one ship to another ship because it's exploding in the vacuum of space. If you fail that fear check, you're going to die. So you have to, as a GM, it's tough because you have to strike that balance. And I don't ask me how to do it. I'm just giving ideas.
But what you would do is you would give another alternative.
Yeah, exactly.
That may not necessarily be a good one.
Well, trauma's a good one.
Trauma
out of the GENESYS rulebooks. And I know in our Knight's Edge setting, some of the equipment I've been playing with, you can gain traumas.
Yep.
And I feel that's completely underused. And if you fail that fear check, sure, you might still be able to force yourself to do it, but you're going to gain a severe trauma, which could have long-lasting effects on your PC as the story unfolds. So, another thing to consider.
Definitely another thing to consider. Those psychological traits are there for a reason. And if your fear is like the exposure of space, if you're playing in sort of like a Cthulhu type adventure, or Knight's Edge, and you've got that, a fear of falling, that's sort of jumping from ship to ship, even if you've got that parachute or whatever, that you're going to be having your GM within his or her rights to say, that's going to be an extra setback because I know what you've got a fear of that sort of stuff. So those are the sort of things which are almost goes back to what we were saying before about in the last episode about setbacks and how useful they can be. It's another type of terrain. It's that psychological terrain that Mike's been going on with during this episode, which is great. Yeah. So that is water and vacuum.
So
all right.
Fire, acid,
so
and
let's
corrosive.
talk about fire, acid, corrosive atmospheres.
These ones are fun.
No, I do have some things to add to these as well. So we'll talk about the basics, and I'll jump in. I'll throw some ideas in for people to listen to.
Indeed. So basically, fire, acid, and corrosive atmospheres is anything that is really any of those things. They can be. It can be a blizzard. It can be, an acid storm, acid rain. It could be, if you're on the plane of fire that you have to, brave the elements of. If you're talking D&D, if you've suddenly gone into the negative energy plane, it's that sort of an environment. What sort of things?
Stuff that eats away at you, essentially.
Exactly.
And a xenomorph that's just been shot with a shotgun at close range.
Yeah, indeed. So they're the sorts of things that you need to be looking at. So when we start talking about fire and corrosive atmospheres, it basically has, and there's a nice little table there on table 6.8, which talks about how much damage that you will take.
Not damage.
No, it is not damage. It's just straight wounds. And depending on what sort of environment it is, it may also be straight strain, I guess, if you wanted to play around with it. But in either case, it is straight wounds.
And that's something we should mention, take a little side note, a sidebar, if you will, is that in the rules of the game, if something states you suffer wounds, that isn't, your soak never applies to that.
No.
Yes.
And a lot of people get tripped up on that. And even we did initially.
Yes. We got, in a previous episode, we got tripped up on it as well.
It's easy to do.
Because your soak only applies to damage.
Correct.
Wound damage or strain damage.
Yes. Wounds is the byproduct of your soak, essentially. Damage hitting your soak.
Yeah.
Now, that's in some situations, the rules might have in brackets to make it clear, do X wounds, this ignores soak.
Yep.
And that's just there purely so players don't get tripped up by it, because players do get tripped up by it.
Yep.
But if it's wounds, doesn't matter what your soak is, you'll take the wounds.
Yep.
Now, the same applies to strain, but strain's a little bit more weird because they use strain twice. Now, if it's just straight strain, again, your soak isn't applied to that.
Correct.
If it's strain damage, your soak is applied to that.
Correct.
Now, people get tripped up on that easily because, as I said, they use the same word for two different things.
Yeah.
But if it says strain damage, then you apply your soak. That's your good general rule of thumb.
Yep. You see.
Yeah.
But there.
But I can easily see that if you're in a corrosive atmosphere
Yep.
and it's not something that you can breathe,
No.
it might be eating away at your flesh, but you might also start suffocating.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, as I was saying on page 111, down on table, I think it's 1.6 to 8, fire, acid, and corrosive atmospheres. There's a nice little table there, which basically has, there are 4 categories. Now, they've got different ratings. Obviously, they have some examples for the different sorts of environments or the different sort of corrosive atmospheres that may exist. 1 to 2 is campfires, mild, sort of minor, fumes from a heavy fire, things like that. 3 to 5 is flammable liquids, flamethrowers, chemical leaks. Welding torches is 6 to 9, and then obviously, 10 or more, you have lava. How you'd survive lava, I'm not quite sure, but you've got lava blast furnaces and things like that. Now, that rating, which goes from 1 to 10 on this table, and obviously can go higher, is the amount of wounds that you would take. Not wound damage, it's just the amount of wounds that you would take. Now, depending on the environment as well, it may be a case that you're just taking some strain. It's just going to be dependent on what your take is on it. And that's not very cool at all.
No, it's not.
Although it could be, depending on if it's like extreme cold. So that's the sort of things that you'd be looking at.
Now,
Yes.
it says fire, acid, and corrosive atmospheres, but there's no reason you can't think out of the box for these. Say if you're in a situation where there's arrows raining down from archers over the hill. Your characters and the players and the NPCs are all fighting in a small section of a giant battlefield.
Yep.
So the GM can say, hey, every turn, until those archers go away somehow, you're going to take a rating 3 to 5 worth of damage. Wounds, every turn. And that represents the arrows raining down at your position. So you can get really creative with that. You're being swarmed, you're fighting some giant spider, but the giant spider happens to be hatching little baby spiders from its back. And there's so many of them, you just can't ever kill them. There's an endless swarm of them coming from this giant spider. And then GM may say, until you kill that spider, you're going to take 2 wounds every turn as the little spiders crawl into your armor and eat your flesh. And that's a perfect example of corrosive atmosphere that isn't necessarily a atmosphere as some people might think it to be.
Good call.
It's the atmosphere of the combat.
Yeah.
And what's going on.
You're removing the need to have another group of enemies that you're dealing with.
Exactly.
It is just an environment.
It's a constant.
Yeah.
There's lots of examples you can do that with. Like the World War I trench example. There is just gunfire coming from every direction. It's raining artillery fire. Everyone's taking shrapnel blasts. It doesn't matter where you are or who you are. You're going to get hurt somehow. Either that be a scrape, a cut, or a bruise, you're falling over, you get hit by a stray bullet. The GM may say, well, this Dead Man's Land has a rating 6 to 9 of damage every turn. Yep. And that's just your dudes. You can't do anything about that. That's just gunfire coming from every direction. And until those guns go away from some other narrative effect, say in 3 turns a bomber comes past and kills the artillery, you're going to be taking that damage every turn until you get to the other side of the trench. And people talk about, I know this question comes up on our podcast page where someone was asking how we deal with high level characters. That's something how you deal with them. You just put in a threat they can't take away easily by hitting it with a sword and watch them start to suffer because it doesn't matter what the soak is. They're just taking hurt.
Absolutely. Now they also talk about very quickly when talking about rules is if you're on fire, for example,
or coated in acid,
or whatever else, that you need to really stop and roll, basically. So that means that you have to take a check. Yes.
Which handy tip from the Dice World podcast is also a really good way of getting out of conversations. Stop dropping and rolling.
I'm doing it right now.
You're very clear for someone on the ground rolling. But anyway,
I'm diverse.
So you need to make a coordination check.
Oh,
It's average on hard surfaces such as the deck of a spaceship, or an easy check on grass or soft ground. Jumping into a body of water stops the damage immediately, it says. In the case of acid, it's really up to the GM
And
how they want to handle
There's
that.
this one as well. The corrosive atmosphere of starchy environments.
Starchy environments. I'm sure there's an in-joke there. But
You know
anyway.
about the starch.
Yes, right.
When Caitlin just fell over for no reason to your
that's
old
right.
place.
There was
floor was starchy.
starch on the floor, and that is why I slipped.
Yes.
There was no slipping. There was straight falling for no reason.
Just flat tiles, and all of a sudden it's just like on the ground. Was that the first or second session that you come to play? And
It was one of those.
Sounds like something I would do the first or second time I meet you.
We were
It's like, hi, I'm Caitlin.
you were handing out Kinder Surprises, so it must have been a few sessions in.
Right.
Yeah, it was a few sessions.
You just don't give Kinder surprises to anyone.
No, not your first session. That's the only special game is Kinder Surprises.
Oh, dear. Now, the other thing...
See, I was trying to be nice to you, and I was into in the process, and yet I still get made fun of.
Hey, everyone
That's
else
how it
forgot about the Kinder Surprises, but I remembered them and the starch.
Wow.
It was two surprises. The gift that keeps on giving.
This is how you know you're part of the crew.
Yes. Indeed. So, what might you give some setback die or some boost die?
Starchy floors.
Starchy floors.
Sorry, I just wanted to touch base on the fire
Yes.
for a moment.
Go.
Because some people might ask this question, because I've asked this question before myself. What's the difference? It even mentions flamethrowers.
Yep.
That's not how flamethrowers work in the game.
That's not how it works.
That's not how it works.
But I've always thought about this. If you look at the rules,
Sorry, Martin. I've always thought about how flamethrowers work.
well, haven't you?
No, I'm too busy being traumatized by starchy floors.
The starch thrower is her nightmare.
I
would be terrifying,
fantasize
let's
about
be
setting Ian's house on that area on fire using a flamethrower because of how embarrassing that moment was. Surprised I didn't
petrol
leave
light
the
up.
country after that moment.
So tell us, Martin, how do flamethrowers work?
Okay. Well, in the game, they're just straight damage.
Right.
Right, they're just a straight damage weapon, but they
they do
normally
have the
have
burn
burn quality. Yes,
Yep.
which could also be, something that throws like liquid nitrogen. That could also have
Yep.
the burn quality.
Absolutely.
But
Or someone with really good sass.
generally speaking, what it's referring to here in the corrosive atmospheres is being on fire, not having fire thrown at you. Do you know what I mean? Like that's the difference. You've been set aflame.
Yep.
And you're suffering the damage.
It's just no good.
Now, the burn quality is a little bit different because it deals damage equal to the rating of the weapon.
Yep.
If you want to make your game a little bit more deadly in that regard, you could change it to being it gives a
Fire.
a fire rating of equal to its damage rating.
They make flamethrowers insane and
Yes.
expensive.
And illegal and so illegal.
Yeah, there's a reason why they're not allowed anymore.
But that's if you want to make your game a little bit more dangerous and to bring it more in line with these rules here. You could do that. I'm not sure I necessarily... Well, actually, no, I'd probably do it. But because burn can be a little bit underwhelming on low damage weapons. But it is very powerful otherwise.
Yep.
Because basically looking at what it says under the burn quality, which is the active quality, which means that you do need two advantages to be able to activate it in the first place, it basically inflicts damage over time. So when it's triggered, one target hit by the attack continues to suffer the weapon's base damage each round for a number of rounds equal to the weapon's burn rating.
Yes.
And so you apply any damage at the start of each of the target's turns. If multiple targets suffered hits from a weapon with the burn quality, so if you've got something with blast, for example, the quality may be triggered multiple times, affecting different targets each time.
Now, one would argue that a person who is burning This is going to be controversial. But one could argue that when someone is suffering the burn quality, they're also on fire.
Yes. Now, this is something which is interesting. So some GMs I've seen when their NPCs are on fire, they continue to fight. I don't care what sort of GM that you are, if your characters aren't stopping and putting themselves out first before anything else, you're probably doing it wrong.
Unless there's some sort of
or they're a
mindless creature.
badass.
Or they're a complete badass.
If it's a heroic character or there's some sort of mindless creature, sure.
Yep.
But our regular minions probably going
to put themselves out first.
They're probably out of the fight.
Yeah.
But that being said, if you change the burn quality slightly
Yep.
to say that it applies for a number of rounds equal to its rating, the burn quality, like actual fire
quality.
equal to its rating, equal to the damage of the weapon,
Yep.
then whoever you hit with that weapon is going to stop, drop, and roll.
Yes, they are. Yes, indeed. Especially if you've got like a flamethrower with damage 8 or 9.
Yeah, because the first hit isn't going to set they're not going to suffer the fire until the next turn. So if they stop, drop, and roll, they're probably not going to take any damage because it hasn't gone through their clothes. But they're still going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm pretty
Being
sure
on fire is frightening. Flamethrowers are frightening.
I think it should be like this. This is how I would run it.
And that's entirely up to you. As long as you're letting your players know at
Up
the start
front,
of a game, you're fine.
the players are like, sweet, I'll buy all the flamethrowers and destroy every NPC ever.
Yeah, and they're going to get picked up at every checkpoint because
Exactly,
these
'cause-
things are forbidden by the Geneva Convention.
Assuming you're playing in a world with the Geneva Convention, Martin. So I'm pretty sure Knight's Edge doesn't have one.
I don't know if they are actually forbidden, but usually things like
they are 100% forbidden by the Geneva Convention.
But yeah, so there's a couple of things that you need to take into consideration there with those sorts of environments. But the one that they don't really mention is cold. And I know that I've mentioned it a couple of times. But cold it can kill people in a very short period of time.
Oh, absolutely.
With exposure to that sort of environment.
Yeah,
So-
I think cold, like the damage from cold, would probably take longer to inflict because it depends how cold it is.
depends on how cold it
If
is.
you're like talking like a survivable temperature, but if you haven't got the appropriate gear, it's probably take you a long time to kill you. But if you're somewhere where it's super super cold, you probably die straight away. But it does vary. It has a larger degree of variance than say fire does, because fire always sucks.
So instead of, like coordination rolls, it may be that you have to take, because you can't like
Stop, drop, and roll, fire, or
Stop,
cold
roll
away.
it.
Hey,
Cold,
look, you can't stop, drop, and roll with acid either.
No, that's true. That is true. And that's why it says
Or
it's
white
completely
phosphorus.
up to the GM how you want to handle that. Sure, you might jump in a pool of milk. I don't know whether that will make any sense.
Well, I don't know how to deal with the cold. You jump in a tauntaun.
You jump in a tauntaun. This is true. It's a little bit lukewarm.
It is.
Anyway, that's terrible.
I thought that pun smelled bad on the outside.
Oh, no. So you might consider, instead of coordination, you might consider resilience
Yeah.
instead. That you're making resilience rolls to try to stay warm.
Well, using my example of the archery fire coming down and doing sustained damage, that could be coordination to try and avoid the incoming fire. Like
Yeah.
if a character spends an active activation to try and avoid this damage,
Yep.
go for it. Make a coordination check, or even a warfare check to know where the best place is to try and get into the blind side of the archery fire. Lots
Yeah.
of things you can do if you think out of the box.
Or
Yeah.
they could spend a story point and find a big shield or something
Yeah.
to hide
Yep.
under, or a wagon or something for a turn.
Yep. Absolutely. That sounds cool. Such good examples, guys. So last couple of things. So we've got suffocation.
Sort of went through that with.
We
the
sort of went through
vacuum,
that with that vacuums. Just remember, you've got to take 3 strain. Suffers 3 strain, not strain damage. Make sure you understand
straight
that.
up
It's
strain.
Straight up strain that you're going to be taking.
Because if you're suffocating, it doesn't matter how much armor you're wearing, honestly.
Yeah.
And that's something else, just very quickly, I'm going to touch base on, talking about gear. If you're overburdened, normally, that for every, I don't know how it
I
works,
think it's every encumbrance.
for every encumbrance level, it's like 1 setback die. But if you're in water, you're going to be stinking.
Yeah.
So that's going to be making some serious checks to, might be the decision that, or might force the players to make the decision whether they're going to dump whatever they can just to stay afloat and be able to move in the first place. So something to consider there.
Everyone knows players' backpacks don't exist until they need to exist.
This is true.
Yeah, but if you start making them like... I love the idea of making players choose between their gold and their lives.
Gold.
Right.
Always buy a new life.
This is true. And when we're talking about swimming, we're also thinking about using magic. It can make a difference to casting spells. But if you've got augment, you can be obviously, suddenly you're developing gills that you can breathe underwater. So sure, you can take all of that gold with you, but you're going to be dragging it at the bottom of the floor of the seabed.
With one less maneuver every
With
time.
one less maneuver every time.
Everyone else is drowning. I'm carrying my gold slowly. But I've still got my gold.
This is true. And last but not least, we have falling, which is always a fun one. Falling, how much damage you take is completely based on how far you're falling, strangely enough. But it's based on range. So if you've got short, medium, long, and extreme, it's some nasty stuff. So with short, you take 10 damage and 10 strain, which is interesting. And we'll explain that in a tick. But medium is 30 and 20. And then long is wounds equal to the wound threshold plus 1. And a critical injury at plus 50. Ouch. And you also take 30 strain. If you can survive the 30 strain, I'm impressed. And then last for extreme, wounds equal to the wound threshold plus 1, critical injury at plus 75, or death at the GM's discretion. And 40 strain. Again, how you'd be able to survive 20 strain is beyond me, but hey, look, it's possible.
Bond good.
Really?
Yep.
Well, there you go. I did not know that. So let's talk about falling. Martin, what's the story with the damage and the strain part? Do you suffer both, or do you suffer only one of them?
Well, you suffer both, but one's damage and one's strain.
Right.
So one's soakable, one's not.
Correct.
Unless you're falling long or extreme. In that case, it's not damage anymore, it's straight wounds.
Yes.
And how it's written is in a way that no matter how many wounds you have, you will be knocked out, essentially.
Correct.
Because it's just your wound threshold plus 1.
Now, there is one. That is true. There is one saving grace, however, and that's in the final paragraph of this section, and it talks about making an athletics or coordination roll. So, Caitlin, take us through that section.
So basically, the Genesis books talks about how a character can reduce the damage taken from falling by making an average athletics or coordination check. Each success reduces the damage suffered by 1, while each advantage reduces the strain suffered by 1. A triumph could, at the GM's discretion, reduce the overall distance fallen by 1 ranged band as the character grabs onto a handhold or does something else to arrest their fall.
Yeah. So, like in Indiana Jones, when he obviously jumped off the tank, he's made his athletics roll, probably rolled a triumph, and was able to grab onto the roots of the tree. And was able to sort of drag himself up that, so he didn't actually suffer any sort of ill effects at all.
But it is interesting, though, because this is a good thing I've only just noticed, actually.
Yes.
If you're falling long and extreme, that check won't do anything because it reduces damage, not wounds.
That is true.
So if you're falling long or extreme, you're hoping to roll that triumph.
Yeah.
Yeah, no amount of flailing or landing on your feet is going to help you at that range.
And honestly, if you're falling medium, you have to make one hell of an athletics or coordination check to try and not be knocked out from 30 damage, 20 strain.
Yeah.
Because most characters, that's going to be KO.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So falling is scary.
Oh, it's lethal.
As it should be.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's probably a few, I don't know of any, but there's probably some talents out there.
All right.
I know that there is a 1 or 2 in Star Wars.
Here's another one for you.
Yes.
So if I fall, right, say long range, I take a number of wounds equal to my threshold plus 1, so it knocks me out. I'm incapacitated. I also suffer 30 strain. I'm incapacitated. So do I take 2 crits?
That's a good question. And Martin has the answer to this question.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have the answer to this one. No.
Okay.
The reason is because under strain, if you look at strain in the book, you don't naturally suffer crits from strain damage, only at GM's discretion.
Okay.
So when we're looking at this, it's already taken into account the crit for going unconscious due to wounds.
Yep.
It's added that there because if you're falling it long and you get knocked unconscious by wounds equal to threshold +1, you're not taking a crit from that. You're taking the crit here, which is the same crit, but at +50.
Cool.
You won't take an extra crit for strain because that would be unfair.
It's a good one to cover now because I could see it coming up because that could turn that falling damage from a +50 to a +60, which is gross.
Exactly. But if you also look at suffocation, where you're suffering strain wounds directly, as opposed to vacuum, you don't suffer a crit upon falling unconscious like you do with vacuum.
Right.
Because strain doesn't do that unless the GM says it does.
Yep.
Good. There's an entire sidebar, in actual fact.
There is. It's a great sidebar. Read it.
Yeah, and it talks about strain damage and critical injuries. So, yeah, it's not always likely, but sometimes it can be. Like if you're on the edge of a precipice or something like that, or even if it's just you're on the edge of a trench. Or
No, my favorite example is the pressure point talent.
Right.
Because someone normally when you're taking strain damage, it's from something non-lethal. But if someone's using pressure points and beating you up, like absolutely wailing into you, that's probably going to be able to cause crits.
Yep.
So that's my example, and that is entirely up to the GM.
To the GM,
they can say no.
But as for adding falling into a narrative sense, again, it's one of those things I think it can be often overlooked. It obviously depends on the situation players are in. But if there's a danger of falling and the players know how brutal it is, they're probably less likely to do fairly brash things. They're going to be cautious and mindful of the danger of falling.
Yeah.
So you can do a lot of cool things with the threat of falling. You know, that could be fighting on the edge of a cliff face and you lose balance and fall off the edge. That's scary. So there's lots of things you can really spice up a scene with height. And in any action movie we've watched, some of the most dramatic stuff happens at height because there is that risk of falling and to your death. Similar to the whole space thing. It's once you've taken that plunge, there's not much really can save you unless you're super lucky. So
and then you've got, if you to throw it into zero gravity, then suddenly the gravity comes back on and you're on the wrong side of where you need to be. You've that may be a tactic for some PCs who've gone, right, turn off gravity. They use it in Rebels. Turn off the gravity, and so they have to move their way through. People are sort of floundering all over the place through their communicators. They're sort of telling, right, everybody grab onto something. The other bad guys, they're not knowing what's going on. And then all of a sudden the gravity comes back on, and so the bad guys are going to be taking, a fall of short range. That sort of stuff. So,
and, if you look at the lava example, you fall from a height into lava. One would argue because lava is, it's like lava is if you fall high enough, you're falling to molten steel. So you suffer the effect of the fall and the effect of the lava damage that's going to apply.
I actually watched a thing the other day talking about lava, and it was like one of those. What would happen if you'd fallen into lava? They reckon that you'd be pretty much dead before you even hit the lava in the first place.
Radiant heat.
The radiant heat would basically melt your skin off. So,
to get graphic about it, it's usually you breathe in and you suffocate.
From all of that.
No, because you can't breathe.
Yeah.
Because the only thing you can breathe is just superheated air, and that just scalds your lungs out from inside.
Yeah.
Fun facts for those at home.
Amazing. We always talk about the most sunny, bright things in this podcast.
People wonder why we did Night's Edge the way that we did it. Anyway.
I would suggest as well that if you're in a high gravity environment and you fall, maybe increase the range that you've fallen at.
Oh, good call. Good call.
Or even low gravity.
Low gravity, reduce it.
Good call. I like that.
At uppers gravity, you fall up. It's hilarious.
Yay!
That's really weird.
But that's a perfect example of combining different environmental effects and having some really cool, funky things going on.
I probably wouldn't increase it more than once. Either way, it doesn't matter how much gravity is there. Don't make it overcomplicated.
Hey.
It's lethal enough.
Oh, hey, you can never get lethal enough, mate. You're falling from a height in pitch black darkness.
Ooh.
Good luck trying to find something to scrab
Yeah,
onto.
the coordination rolls.
GM
Yeah.
could add those 3 setbacks to your coordination athletics check. You just simply can't see what you're trying to grab onto.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be bad for you when you hit
And
that ground.
threat that you get could be you grabbing onto things like razor blades on the wall.
What are you falling down?
Or a snake. Or a snake.
Or just sharp rocks.
Short, sharp rocks.
Whatever.
Razor blade rocks. You're falling through a Gillette factory.
Or you flip onto a story point and it's not that you've grabbed something, it's something's grabbed you.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm saved. Oh,
Am I?
It's a Sarlacc.
well, it's like that scene out of the labyrinth when what's her name falls down the well with arms, and she's falling
Oh, and
until
all
the
of a
arms
sudden
grab her,
Oh,
and they start all talking to her. That scene's amazing. I like it.
Into the oubliette.
That's it.
All right, so that's pretty much environments from a mechanical perspective. So let's
Well,
talk.
I like to think we went beyond mechanical spectrum.
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, that is true.
What we always
That is
try to
true.
do.
Yeah, exactly. So there's something that I think is, not necessarily used a lot with good storytellers, which a lot of our players and GMs that listen to our show are. But there's one thing that doesn't get taken into consideration a lot, and that's using the environment to tell part of the story. So if you've got something you're trying to tell of a very harsh environment that, this is a hotbed of
Scum and villainy.
scum and villainy or something like that, you might be using a desert, which can say things like, there's a lot of desperation in the air. Poverty is high because there's, the people are charging an absolute fortune, for water or whatever else. Yet there's plenty of hats on sale. The reduction of desert environment gear might be higher, but there's all sorts of things that can be impacted on the type of story and the environment that you're using to tell that story. Does anybody else have some examples of that?
Yeah, there's lots of things you can do. I think that's what you said was a good example. The one I think of, I don't know if it's necessarily has a mechanical mechanical sort of feedback to the game, but like I think of Blade Runner, and it's raining all the time.
Yep.
And that rain really helps set that noir setting.
Yeah.
And what do you see in that setting? You see people in raincoats. You see people with those with translucent umbrellas.
Yep.
None of that really will affect the mechanical side of your story, but by describing that with the rain, that really helps give a sense of mood.
It gives that dreariness.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
one of my favorite aspects of the first. I love the second Blade Runner film, but I love the first Blade Runner more because I did in more atmospheric perspective. Because I felt the first Blade Runner captured the atmosphere a little bit better.
Yep.
And saying that Blade Runner 2 does it really well as well in some scenes, but Blade Runner 1 has a real gritty, dark, noir street feel with that rain. And if you describe the rain in a real narrative-rich sense like that to your players, they're going to pick up on it. And if you wanted to add mechanical elements to the game from that rain, you certainly can. Even as mild as a setback dice for vision checks, or even coordination checks because,
Everything's
when it's
waterlogged.
slippery. Exactly.
Just reminds them that it's there.
That's it. But it really helps drive it home.
But I'm also talking about sort of like I mentioned deserts before and things like that, which is sort of, very, very sort of harsh and dry and it's difficult places to live. So if you're building a society around sort of a desert type of environment, there are going to be certain things and the people are going to be a certain way. Resources are going to be limited, and things like that. But then you've also got, things like snow, as I said. I've always been a big lover of Hoth, for example, in The Empire Strikes Back. So you kind of, snowy environments, they're very isolated, especially when you're talking about Hoth. It's where the rebels have run away to, away from the dangers of the Empire. But they have a lot of difficulties trying to survive. That it's a harsh, rugged environment, and it's bitterly cold. So you've got supply issues again. But then you might have something like, oceans or islands and beaches where what you're trying to convey is more tranquility or relaxing, or yet if you go into sort of like the interior of islands, you might be looking at something like, it's very brutal and native, with hidden dangers in that regards. You've got forests which are, fairly lush, but they can be inhospitable places with natives or with dangerous animals and things like that. Your jungles for, even more danger. You've also got space, as we've sort of talked about as well when you talk about vacuums and stuff like that. I guess what I'm getting at is that when it comes to environments, you can use environments in a really successful way to set the mood of the adventure that you're trying to tell. Indiana Jones is probably a really good example of how they use that. You just look at any film. If you go through any film that you've enjoyed, they will use the environment. And yes, there will be rules that will apply in that environment. But they've used the environment to tell, it becomes another character that the heroes have to interact with. What do you think, Caitlin?
Well, I think it really, I want to go back to describing environments based on your senses, because I think that how you interpret the world around you with your senses is kind of almost how you feel about that scene. Like, is it cold? Why is it cold? Is it cold unnaturally?
Yep.
And how you actually narratively describe why and how they're feeling or what they are physically feeling. I think that is what sets the tone of the world or the scene that they're in, or the room or the environment. And you can do it so simply. It doesn't have to be, 10 minutes of describing the way the air is going across your arm, you can even do it in just like a couple of sentences. And as we were talking, Chase actually brought up to me one of his GM screens. I'm not exactly sure which of the games it is for, but it's one of his GM screens that actually just has some little snapshots and just little ways of describing scenes that actually can talk about smells and sounds that actually add to the scene itself without going into in depth. And like some of the things that I could use as an example in terms of letting the environment set the scene is a disturbing rustling of rocks announce a small rock slide has begun, right? Like, so simple, one sentence, and you've got the environment that you're in, something that kind of causes a little bit of an anxiety because you don't know how big that rock slide is, but also talks about sound, as well as potentially what you're feeling in the air. Like, are you feeling now the vibrations of the rock slide coming towards you, or things like that? Another one is you catch the sparse scent of wildflowers growing nearby in a huddled bunch. Super simple. That actually makes me feel a little bit more serene, and it makes me feel a little bit happy. Like, oh, what's going to be around the wildfires there? And I love one that I personally really love, because just me, I love clouds, I love rain, but clouds gather and loom. The air smells damp with the promise of rain. This is literally 1-2 sentences that you can say in passing that really sets the scene. Without and engages the players in what's happening. Those are like, when it comes to examples, like those are the main things that I think of as narratively describing it, and then letting the mechanics come into play when you actually start to engage in it. Yeah,
because I think one of our previous episodes where we had GM Mick on, and we were talking about how to engage other players, and we were talking about making sure that when you're describing something similar to what you're talking about there, Caitlin, is that you're using, sight, sound, smell, taste, and feel that, or that was touch, and I can't remember which one I've missed. But anyway, so it's as long as in a scene, if you're describing something to someone, that you're using 3 senses to describe that, because most people are going to pick up on one of those 3. You don't have to go to the extent of explaining all 5. That's just too much overload. But 2 or 3, I think, for beginners, is normally a good approach. And I think then that you can, that will then spark some ideas in yourself as to what rules you need to be applying to that particular environment.
And something to always remember with that as well is that there is a 6th sense.
There is.
And you should be taking that into consideration as well.
That's
so that
true.
can be one of the 3 that you choose. Especially in games like Star Wars or in a fantasy game.
Yep.
The Force or magic can be that 6th sense.
Absolutely.
Or just if it's in a modern game, you might get that prickle on the back of your neck.
Any sort of horror game with that sort of horror tone.
Well, it's psychology. It adds.
Yeah.
That's your 6th sense.
Yep. Absolutely. So I think that's pretty much covered environments. Is there anything else that people would like to add that to maybe some GM tips and stuff like that? Michael?
Honestly, I think I've exhausted my knowledge, which isn't much to start off with.
Oh, stop it.
But I think we covered everything. Well, I've covered everything I need that I feel like I could interject.
I think we've pretty much covered.
I think
everything.
so. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Caitlin?
Well, there's one that I want to add as well, is that we've spoken a lot about the environment within the game. But some of the things that I really like to do is actually enhance the environment around the table a little bit as well with the setting that's happening. And it's really easy to do with just a few little things. Like it's an extra step, and it's by no means like, fixing the game. But some of the things that I like to do is, like, if we're about to do combat, is have some combat music playing in the background. Or if we happen to be starting off our thing in a tavern, having some ambient music going in the background, like a fire crackling, or if we're talking about rain, have some rain going. Just little things that necessarily just add to the overall enjoyment around the table. Some of the other things that I've done previously is when I had a D&D styled game that I was running. It was set in D&D, but it wasn't D&D, because DMing that still terrifies me to this day. But it was just something like that where when the players came in, I had organized an entire menu based around D&D and medieval type food. So they came in, the menu was based on the tavern in which they started. So the same tavern is where the players all started. I had like the cheese and meat dips there. I had the food where it was like, served in a bread bowl. There's a fire crackling on the TV behind there. Just all these little things that just enhance the actual environment around the table. I know Chase, so my husband, he has these little metal containers that actually have different types of smells in them.
Right.
So depending on where we're in, he'll open up the green forest one, and it just kind of wafts smells around the room. Like, it doesn't, these are all little extra things, but I think it just makes games just a little bit more fun. And I like to, when because I think about the game I'm coming up with on the weekend or whatever is happening, and those are just little things that tide me over until we're actually around the table.
Yeah, well, I mean, to sort of expand on that, friends vows that this is years gone by, and I'm sure I've talked about this on the show before, is that what they would do is that they would have like a shed or something like that in their backyard that they would do up when we were playing Cthulhu. And they would have it so that you had to walk through sort of this almost a maze into this shed, and they would have like spiders, and like you'd have to
that's awesome.
go through the web and whatever else. And then they would just have torches and candles lighting the table where you would be playing in. Because it was in this particular encounter, this particular session, because with Cthulhu, if you can survive one session, you're doing pretty well. I've never actually played in a Cthulhu campaign, so that'd be interesting. But that when you went in, we were playing in medieval times, where we were playing farmers, and we suddenly got invited to this banquet. But because we'd sort of, underprivileged farmers, we started in this barn that we used to live in type thing. And so just by setting that, you're setting people's expectations right from the start of what sort of environment and what sort of risks there's going to be. And it was in the middle of the night, and so
that's really cool. See, I love those types of just little touches to games and things like that. I love it. I reckon that's really cool.
Indeed.
Well, I know over the last week or so, or maybe 2 weeks now, time blurs, I've been slowly putting together a playlist of tracks for Android.
Yep.
And that's basically me listening to stuff at work for various stuff on Spotify, and if I like the song, I have, I think, 6 playlists made for cyberpunk RPGs.
Yep.
And if the song fits a certain atmosphere, I will then save it to that playlist.
Yeah.
So when we're at the table and we enter combat, I will just immediately press the combat playlist. And I don't have to search for a track. It's just anything I know that's in that playlist is suitable for combat.
Absolutely.
I have one for high tension scenes. If it's a high tension scene, I play that playlist, and any track in there, again, will be suitable for a high tension scene. And I'm fairly picky what goes in and out of them, so I just have to sit there and listen to music, which is not terrible, and filter through it and just slowly add to these as I go, and it's actually quite fun.
And there's a few programs that allow you to do that as well, to add in environmental effects as well.
Yeah,
there are some of them are good, some of them are expensive, some of them are free. It just depends on what sort of. I mean, if you've got internet access easily available. There are a couple of good ones online where there's free music. Then you've got, as Mike's already mentioned, you've got Spotify, but then you've got the Australian company, Sirenscape. That's the correct terminology, I think. I think I stuffed it up last time. But Sirenscape has got a wide range of options available. It can be a little bit pricey, but it's good quality stuff. I know that Paizo uses it exclusively for a lot of their stuff, and they even there's a license agreement between Sirenscape and Paizo now where when they do adventure paths, they come up with a soundtrack for that adventure path,
there you go.
which is really cool. So there's lots of stuff there.
Honestly, don't underestimate the power of YouTube as well.
Agreed.
A lot of my ambient stuff that I just want to play in the background to forget about, essentially, just have it there in the background, is just stuff I find on YouTube. There is
absolutely
so many tracks on YouTube that are 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, or 10 hours long, and they're just an ambient loop. And if the track is shorter than you'd like, you just set it to loop anyway. And there's almost something for every setting. Just ambient music, ambient sounds, and the beauty about YouTube, because it's browser based, I literally can have 5 tabs open with it's a ghetto way of doing it. But if you're on a budget or don't want to muck around with any other software, or there's music or sounds that you can't find somewhere, it's specifically only on YouTube, there's no reason you can't just layer multiple tabs of YouTube going at once. I've done that before where I've had ambient background noise overlaid by something else, like music or another sound, to compile a new sound. It's a quick way of doing it if you're in a pinch, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just adds to the atmosphere. An environment that you're experiencing, which means that you can be not necessarily describing what you're hearing all the time, because there's going to be an hour-long track of an empty house or something like that.
City noises and stuff like that's a good one. Stuff that sits in the background. People, the players will hear it, but not really hear it. They'll know it's there, but they understand where they are.
Yep.
If they do hear it.
There's always the good free one of this, which is tabletopaudio.com.
That's the one that I was there. I just couldn't remember the name of it. So go and take a look at that. That's fine. We might even put that in the show notes. So when we put it up on YouTube and wherever else. So I think that pretty much covers everything, unless there's something else that anybody else wants to raise.
No, I think we've made it through the woods.
That's another example. So, I think that pretty much covers everything that we can think of to help you to include some exciting and memorable places for your players to visit. And I think it might be as good a time as any to look at what our listeners have been asking you about.
Don't we have a name for that? I thought we called it Behind the Screens.
That's it.
Behind the Screens.
And welcome to Behind the Screens, where we, the hosts of the show, will answer your games and rules questions regarding the GENESYS Role Playing Game. And tonight, we've got some great questions from you. So, Darkfyre, take us through our first question.
So we have a question from Logan Hodgkins, who asked via Facebook. My group is planning a setting roulette. Awesome. Love to hear it. And to create a new world to play in. This will be my first endeavor in creating our own world from scratch. I'm so overwhelmed with how to organize everything we create. How did you organize your information? Excel, OneNote, stacks of scrap paper, and sticky notes?
That's a really good question.
Well,
It is.
I think initially, don't worry about notes.
No.
Just get everyone around the table and just smash through the basics of it.
Yep.
Flesh it out, and then start taking notes. That's my 2 cents straight away.
Yeah, get everyone on board for the creation process.
Yeah.
You don't have to remember everything exactly.
Take some notes if you want to. Let everybody at the table take their own notes, because they're going to be writing down the stuff which is important to them.
Yeah.
So when you're reviewing that, you're obviously going to have, okay, well, I've written down this. Okay, well, they must have been key points for you and stuff like that. So, yeah.
I wouldn't be bogged down by it.
If you want as well, record
I
it.
agree.
Yeah?
Record it. Good call.
That,
we did.
to be honest, we didn't really have much other than the little strips of paper that we stuck in the hat.
Yeah, that is true.
We recorded it.
We did.
That was where we've pulled everything from there since then.
Mm-hmm.
And also our conversations around the table.
Yep, true.
We have taken notes and we have recorded in the Google
Setting sheet. Yep.
Google Docs.
Yep.
Is a great one because it's a shared resource that everyone can access and add notes to.
Agreed.
See, the part about the thing about setting roulette, they have to be organic. You can't sit down and make bullet point notes on this, and that, because as soon as you do that, it gets rigid and the imagination and creativity doesn't flow anymore.
Yeah.
So yes, take notes, record it, whatever, but don't try and make it a to-do list.
No.
As soon as you make a to-do list, people will sit around the table going, okay. You want people just rapid firing ideas.
That's kind of step 2.
Well,
Step 1 should be, because if you listen to, and if anybody has any interest in seeing what a setting roulette looks like from the start, when we did the setting roulette for Night's Edge, there was so many things that changed in that 2-hour discussion that went from, originally we didn't have vampires in it, and then all of a sudden it did. It's because that sort of, it was very fluid. It was very organic, the way that the whole thing happened, and somebody will throw out an idea here, and somebody will throw an idea in there, and it's supposed to be a brainstorming session. It follows the same rules as brainstorming. There's no such thing as a bad idea.
Yep.
And people will riff on each other and add to that, like what we did.
It's a conversation.
It is.
It goes both ways. And the step 2 should ultimately be you don't want to put together a whole setting document like we've done. Do the setting sheet.
Yeah, the setting sheet that's in the rulebook,
because that's going to hit on all of the points that you need.
Yeah.
Yep. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel for a setting either. If there's resources that exist already,
use them.
That'll fit for your setting that you're making, use them.
Yep.
Don't feel, as Martin just said, don't feel like you have to create an entire new new supplement book. Just do what needs to be done to make the setting work. Play in it and let it build upon itself as you get rolling dice.
Yeah, if you didn't have something originally in that first discussion, but it makes sense for it to be there, you as the GM, you can add that.
Yeah, that's the joy about this. The setting roulette is because it's your setting. If you play a few sessions, anything you add becomes canon essentially. And we discovered that when we were doing Night's Edge, the live plays. We could just make stuff up on the fly, and that became canon.
Yeah.
And the players can do it too because
Exactly.
of story points.
If all your players at the table are the ones who participated in the setting roulette, watch them have far more involvement in the game, investment in the game than they would in any other normal setting where they're just players, because they're playing in the world that they've helped create. They're going to be so much more drawn into it and want to build upon it.
Well, if you look at the live play that we did for setting roulette, there was never any mention on how the seer communicates with everybody at on board the ship.
Yeah.
Because they have to be able to say, brace for impact or whatever else. How does that go about? Flip of a story point, suddenly a seer has the ability to be able to talk to people who are touching the deck of the ship telepathically. And that was something that came about because of just we hadn't covered it.
Yep.
Flip a story point. The player who's come up with this great idea, that then becomes a thing. And they're going to take ownership of that, and they're going to feel proud of that. And again, that's more buy-in that they have to the game that you're designing. So yeah.
So I'd probably say, in summary, when it comes to like how we organize our information, like, to create the information to begin with, let it be organic. Have a recording. It's the best way to just record it. Then you don't even need to think about it. And then at the end of your just brainstorming session, summarize it with everyone around the table. Yep. So we started with here. So this is where we've ended up. Is everyone happy with this? Then that's the part of the recording that you really focus on listening to take your notes down later. Yep. And then when you've got your notes and when you've got that, have it as a live document. I mean, depending on what area you like to share it at, like Google Docs works great. Everyone will be able to access it. It's constantly updated live. You can use it on your phone. You can use it on your computer. You can access it anywhere. If you're wanting to share it with your players, maybe it's something that you're wanting to create behind the scenes, and then the next session is the players are now playing in it, or whatever. However that actually works best for you. We did, for us, used a lot of Word documents. So not necessarily Excel or any of that kind of stuff. A lot of Word documents, and using the framework and the setting sheet. I think that was even the second part after we had our brainstorming session, was using that setting sheet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, that's in terms of like what we'd recommend in organizing yourself. That would be the first few steps before you actually get into the nitty gritty of actually creating the setting document. After that, that's a whole different thing when it comes to organization. But for creating your first one, I think focus on that. Focus on getting the buy-in from your players, getting that engagement, focusing on the organization later. That comes at the end.
Agreed.
Also, another thing worth mentioning as well, if you're recording your setting roulette, just buy a tape recorder. How old do I sound?
I'm really old.
Exactly.
My gosh.
By using your phone, that's fangled technology. Yep. There's no reason why you and your mates can't just have setting roulettes for fun. You don't have to develop every single setting roulette you come up with.
No.
Just do them for fun as an exercise, record them, and hey, if you decide that's a really cool one, let's make that a setting, you've got it recorded.
Yep.
And you and your friends can listen to it again at any date and go, cool, we really want to do this setting now because...
Fill out a setting sheet.
Yes, fill out a setting sheet. We've already played these other two we've made up, so let's make another one. What have we got in our backlog? And just go and draw one out that you like the sounds of. Yep. I know that short one we did a little while ago with
the horror stuff. Yeah.
I want to play on that so badly. That steamboat horror setting.
Yep.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I love to play on that, and that's something that we have forever recorded.
That's true.
There's no reason why we can't, as a group, go back and
develop
that.
For a Halloween special.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things. Sorry, Caitlin.
Oh, I was just going to say, there's nothing to say that you spend your first hour together creating the setting and then the next 5 hours playing in it.
That is
true. It could totally be a one-shot session.
I will use basically what I did at Gaming Nation Con, not the last one, but the one before that. There was 5 sessions that I ran where we did a setting roulette, and it was only a 3-hour session. We spent the first hour doing up the setting, the second hour creating characters for the setting, and the last hour we played a scenario in that environment. And there were people that were still coming back to me like the next year, so this year it has been, that are going, hey, you know that in that environment that we had, that was amazing. Can we maybe play in a game with that? And, you know, that there are going to be, and there's other people that said, you know, that setting environment that we did with My Little Pony and whatever else, so let's never do that again. But there were some really good ideas. The one that I had with Sam Stewart, where very much a horror setting, but they had developed these trains that would go between realities where it was all a game show, it was all live feed and whatever else. Those sorts of one-off sort of stories that people have involved themselves with have really had an impact to say that they've really enjoyed it. So
there's no reason they can't, those one-off stories, if you decide to do something like that, there's no reason why you can't go, wow, this is really cool. Let's make this a thing and make it more long-term.
Exactly right. And you don't have to go to the extent of, you know, designing 100 page, setting source books like what we're trying to do. But yeah, Martin.
I came up with a really cool idea. For a campaign.
Right.
Make modern day characters.
Right.
I know where you're going.
It's sliders.
Right, yes.
And you're setting roulette at the beginning of every game.
Oh, that's great.
They were the best.
Oh, I love that. We should
cool.
do that.
We should. That's cool. That's one way to show off settings. That's great.
All right.
Yes, I think we should do that.
Next
All right.
question.
Next question. Flano.
So Andrew Scott asks via Facebook.
Also a friend of the show.
Yes.
There's an interesting discussion on the FFG Star Wars boards about awarding XP to players even if they miss a game. I can't say that any game I have played did that. XP has only been awarded if you play that session. What is interesting is the passion behind those that award XP to those missing players. The thread is now 17 pages long.
Wow.
This leads to two questions. GMs, have you ever handed out XP to all players, whether people have played the session or not? Players, would you expect to get XP for a session you missed?
That is a hotbed of a topic.
It is.
And it gets raised occasionally, and there are very passionate GMs and players out there about how it should run.
The first thing I'd like to predicate any discussion that we have, do what's best for your game.
That is true. And it's all about talking to your players.
If you can remember that, you've got it. You've got it sorted.
And these are just our opinions too.
And so we're going to talk about our opinions now.
Yeah, exactly. But generally speaking, every table is different, and you set the expectations for a start. As we have been saying right from the very start of this podcast, you set the expectations, get everybody on board, so you have that social contract of buy-in, and then once you've got that down, you're good to go.
Yep. You can go either way.
All right. Now let's talk about, as you said, Martin, let's talk about our opinions. I am strongly of the belief, and this is my opinion.
Yep.
I am strongly of the belief, I'm just putting that disclaimer out there, is that every player, life happens. We're adults. Okay.
Yeah.
Life happens. Whether it be you have a sick child that you have to look after, a sick partner, a wedding, a bar mitzvah, whatever that you've got to go to. Life.
I've been to 4 bar mitzvahs this week.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. These sorts of things happen.
Yep.
I don't think it can be understated enough that if you go and play in a game, you are having fun with your mates around a table.
Yeah, you're doing it for fun.
You're doing it for fun. It's your enjoyment. It's your downtime. You don't have to think about work. You can just play in a game.
Yep.
And it's fun rolling dice with your mates. You might be drinking. You might not. Whatever. Okay?
Yep.
You're there for the social aspect. And that's a reward within itself. If for whatever reason you can't go, you're missing out on that reward.
That's punishment enough.
That's punishment enough.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you realise that you don't have the XP for the session, and just because something major happened, like there's a couple of memes. There was a meme that I saw the other day, which had, Kermit the Frog looking both ways, going, you've missed one session, and suddenly at the start of the session, you're in the middle of a fight with a dragon. It's sort of, I've missed out on that XP for that side of things. It's just like...
It's not fun coming back to the game either, and then everyone having, leveled up or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're not at a level where you can actually deal with the encounters that they're playing with.
Yep. I don't think that necessarily applies as much to Genesis as it does with Pathfinder and Star Wars.
Hey, you missed 2 sessions because you had to go overseas for someone's wedding or something.
Yep.
You're 40 XP behind.
That's considerable.
Depending on how long your sessions are, right? You could be 40 XP behind. That is a lot of XP.
Sure.
Yeah, you could probably not be ready to fight a dragon.
See, I've always been on the... long as I've been GMing for, I've always just given XP to players who don't show up. If they're consistent enough players and they rock up all the time and they miss the occasional one, sure. Even if they're not consistent, I generally just give them the XP anyway. Do you know why I do that? Because it's easier for me as a GM to track it.
Yes,
And
that's the other thing.
And secondly, who cares? If they rock up, if they get a little bit extra XP, they're at the same level as every other player. They're not a hindrance to the other players because they're much crappier because they missed 5 sessions in a row.
Yeah.
means as a GM, I can then throw stuff equal to an equal playing field across all the players. This whole artificial like reward and punishment system for missing sessions, I just find it this whole layer of just nonsense that isn't necessary. Like, just give people the XP, let them play the game, and who cares if they're not there for every single session?
The other
Doesn't
thing,
matter.
the other thing that's great about this is because, as you say, it's much easier to track the XP that you've gained as a group, so you know where everyone should be at. So it makes it easier for you to design encounters. And people forget their sheets sometimes.
Oh my God, yes. People forget how much XP because they haven't spent their XP from the last session, or they didn't record it, or whatever.
It's so much easier if it's, we're at 300 XP.
Yeah, 'cause they just turn their heads of one of the players at the table and go, "Hey, how much XP should we have?" And if every player at the other player at the table has the same amount of earned XP, chances are that at least one of them is going to know the correct answer, if not the GM.
That's true.
Plus, people drop out of games and people get added to games. So if everyone's on the same playing field no matter what, when someone just gets added in, they get added in at the same level as everyone else.
So much easier.
Absolutely. I think to play a devil's advocate for a moment, one of the reasons why this comes up, I think, is because GMs, and I know that I've been one of them in the past, that if you've got a consistent storyline going on and you've got a player who is inconsistently showing up, you want to be finding ways to try to motivate them to go there. I personally believe now that using XP to do that doesn't work.
It's a hindrance to the game and every other player at the table.
So the best way around it is to be an adult and actually talk to them. What's going on for you? Is there something that do you want to bow out of the game for a while? Well, write your character out of the story. Is it something that's happening in real life that's really affecting you? Maybe you have a new partner. Maybe you've broken up with your current partner. Maybe one of your kids is really unwell and it's something you don't want to burden the other player with. There could be a multitude of reasons.
If they're an inconsistent player, it's not because they don't want to be there.
No.
And if it is, why are they at your game?
That's right.
The thing is, even if they are inconsistent for reasons out of their control, as I said before,
that's it.
Just give them the XP.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
Give them on, who cares?
But it's all about talking, communicating to your players and going, okay, if rather than using XP as the means to do that,
the story, the social camaraderie should be.
It shouldn't enter it. It's like, I know that some people that I've had this discussion with, they've gone, XP is this this magical thing that I can use to give away as candy. And I was just going, well, no, that's not what it's about.
If that's what you're having to use to attract players to stay playing your game,
chances are that you're not doing a good job.
Well, maybe the players, maybe you are doing a good job, but the players at the table have been hardwired incorrectly because they think, well, the only way I can maintain my XP is to get this bonus XP. When it shouldn't be the case. XP should not ever come into the equation when it comes to good storytelling, good role playing.
Well, hey, look, if it is good role playing, right, and you want to give rewards out at the table for that, right? I think that role playing is a communal experience.
Exactly.
Give it to everyone.
Well, that's what in the last few Android games I've given fairly liberal XP, and when you had like a couple of heavy sessions with a lot of moving parts, I've given you guys 30, 40 XP at the end of those sessions.
If there's an amazing moment where something big happens at the table and and it's everyone's having fun, reward the table.
No.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
Yeah,
that's what's going to keep bringing people back.
Exactly.
It's the moments within the game.
If that's the intention.
Yeah. It's the moments in the game that make people come back to your table.
And
it's not XP.
So it ultimately it shouldn't be about trying to get people to the table. And if it's not about getting people to the table, then you're punishing people for not being at the table, and that's a bad attitude. Like, honestly, that is a bad attitude.
And I'm gonna play, put another perspective in there as well. If you're a GM who's punishing players for not showing up or not giving them XP, I know that sounds critical, but I'm being honest.
It's exactly that.
You could be affecting that person's social life. If for some reason that person has a partner and they're sick or they want to... I've seen this happen where the person goes, no, I'm not going to miss a session. I can't miss XP. So they don't do the mature thing and stay at home and look after the partner or what other major life event might be taking place because they're afraid of losing the XP because they know their GM's going to hit them hard if they don't show up. And some people can't separate fantasy games from reality. And you know, I know I prefer to role play 99% of the time than go to work and whatnot. But if there's added temptation of punishment, I'm like, well, I really don't want to miss this session because I miss this session, I'm going to miss this XP, and it's going to feel bad. And you don't want to go for that.
You don't even want to go anymore.
And that starts affecting your real world life too, because if you're forcing yourself to go and overriding important grown up things in your life, that could have more detrimental effects.
Yeah.
Something to keep in mind as well.
And we talk about it because, you know, like we're adults, because we are.
Yeah.
But
What?
I don't like to be, but yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But there can be concerns when you're young as well, and you're playing in a game, right?
Yeah.
You've got to study.
Yep.
Family commitments.
Family
that you have
commitments.
to go to. Yeah.
Other things in your world. It's not all just gaming. I know, shock, but
I find this topic really hard from my perspective because I'm also commonly the type of person that's like, oh, what XP did we get at the end of the last session? 25. Yeah, I'll spend it at the end of this one. I'm sure. There's been so many times where I've just forgotten to spend XP or just don't spend it because the fun I have around the table is the role playing, the thing, and that's not a driver for me. So answering this question is a little difficult from my perspective because I can only think of it from my perspective. I don't know what the drive is to have all this XP, and that's the main reason that I play. But I also think it's important to recognize that that is a drive that some people have. And I think you guys have actually given some really good examples about how you can actually understand what the driver of those types of players are and how to reward them without disadvantaging the other people around the table as well.
Now,
it's about why they're not at the table, not
exactly
trying to make them be at the table.
And
Absolutely.
I'll also add one more thing when it comes to the negatives of tracking XP. I know a while ago when I first started playing in your games, Hooly, you tracked XP separately by player. In the early days of Dragon's Quest,
we've all started.
It's been a thing we've all done at some point. But I remember the number of times we'd like spend half an hour, 40 minutes trying to work out the XP before a session. And as a player who was meticulous with tracking their XP, it was a punishment for me or the other players who had to sit there and just do nothing until it was sorted out. I was speaking candidly because it's a long time in the past and it's not a problem anymore. But it's dead air. It means you're sacrificing playtime to try and work out and balance XP. You know how you fix that? Just give everyone the same amount of XP, and then everyone starts rolling dice straight away, and everyone has fun. Not a moment is wasted counting beads for XP.
Look, and I haven't used like going back to when we played Pathfinder. We stopped using XP entirely because you just tracked levels.
And you basically
By
just
milestones.
said, and like even the adventure paths, they have specific parts of, by this stage of the adventure, your players should be at this level. So you go by, they increase their level at the speed of plot. Doesn't happen so much with Star Wars because there's no such thing as levels.
Well, yes and no. I remember the Bounty Hunter campaign we played, that short one. We had accelerated XP, which is, I guess, similar, but it was the fact that end of every session we would gain a multiplied amount of XP. So we went from like 40 to 80 to blah, 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 blah. It was for a test play. So we had to have characters souped up by the end of it. But over 4 sessions, we had these awesome characters, and it made the whole story felt like a movie. But the fact is the characters start off meh, and by the end of the movie, they're all
amazing.
They're all kick-ass, badass heroes. And that's how most films go. And it felt like that from start to finish for a short campaign. And that's similar to milestones like in D&D, which have levels. It's probably the closest way you could do it to Genesis and Star Wars.
In Genesis, you don't have levels. You have XP.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's the difference. But either way you're looking at it, you're not tracking individually the player's XP. You reach that next milestone when you reach it. And the milestone can be 30 XP or, whatever increment that should be. To look at it from the other perspective for a moment, though, tracking individual XP works sometimes. I know that the living Greyhawk and stuff like that, it's an excellent thing to be able to track your individual XP because you don't use the same character, the same group isn't together all the time.
Yep.
So tracking individual XP is great for that. You can show up and play at any table anywhere in the world.
Yeah, because that's built around that system, so it's
built around
vital.
it.
That's it.
It's vital. It works. And sometimes if you're in your home games, there are times where that could work. But it's a lot of extra math. It's a lot of extra. It takes away from your time at the table.
Yep.
And even if it doesn't, it adds an extra layer of difficulty.
Of unnecessary stuff. Yeah.
I think basically what it comes down to is you have to do a personal assessment on what value that is actually adding to the game and the player experience around the table.
Yeah.
Is that part, have you got a table full of people that love to calculate their individual XP at the end of the thing, and that's where they have their fun, is like competing against each other or whatever type of environment?
Yep.
If it is, then that might work, and that is part of the fun. If it's not, and as we've all just talked about, is what drives us to why we're around the table, and none of it really has to do with how much XP we get at the end of it, then don't waste your energy on something that is not adding value.
Absolutely.
Yep. It goes down to session 0 again. Use that as, is XP a big thing in this campaign for people to have individual XP? If people miss out on sessions, it actually talks about it in the book. When setting up your campaign, how do you handle player absentee? And as long as you're setting that expectation from the start, if everybody's happy to do it that way, and make sure that it's not just a majority, make sure that everybody is on board with all of the conditions that you're applying. Personally, I think that most players won't care. They will just go, no, look, just make it group XP. It's one less thing we have to think about.
Yeah.
And focus on the story instead. I think that that's going to make things better for people. So you're going to have a situation where you've got players that will just go, oh, look, I'm going to have to miss out on this session. I'm going to feel really bad about it. Lots of negative connotations suddenly come about your game.
Also,
you don't want that.
I'll add one more perspective. We do talk from a perspective of having reliable groups of players.
True.
I do know a lot of GMs have the woe of just unreliable players.
Yeah.
And unfortunate as it may be, the only incentive to keep players from being, in some cases, being reliable is rewarding XP.
Yep.
And I can only speak for myself, totally understand that. But if you've got a group of players who aren't like that and who are reliable and will come to your sessions 95% of the time because they're your friends and they're your closest group of gamers, then I would suggest just using group XP.
Yep.
Look, if the only reason people want to be at my table is because of XP, I'm not sure I want to play with those people. That's just me. But but the other thing, I've been in games where it's been XP has been handed out individually, and I've had a lot of fun at those games.
Same.
But there has also been situations where there's that one player that never misses a session.
Yep.
It's either they don't have anything else going on in their life, or they're just always there. They've got their life perfectly balanced. Whatever it is, they end up
like me. They bulldoze things out of their life to make sure. That's generally how I roll.
But that player, because everybody's going to miss 1 or 2 sessions. It happens. Don't hold it against them.
Yep.
But that player then ends up being like hundreds
Miles
of XP ahead of everyone else.
Yep. Yep.
And it's not fun.
No,
Because they solve everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
They get
Well,
all
put
the
it this-
moments.
And think of it this way, right? Say you're running a long-time campaign, and there's been a character that has been there consistently. It's been a build-up that you're in a medieval setting and you're about to face the dragon, using an example we've just had. They miss the session where they kill the dragon. But they had still participated in every single step up until that point. And they don't get rewarded for all the contributions they had to get to that end of the journey. Like, that, for me, that would suck.
I've been in that situation too, and I had to argue that I deserve some of the gold from the kill.
Yeah.
Like they were going to cut me out completely.
See, that's wrong.
And it's like, because gold is a measure of your progression as well.
Certainly in some games it is, definitely.
Even in Star Wars, like your equipment and stuff like that needs to get better. You don't need to. It doesn't need to be buckets of gold. You don't have to kill a dragon and get a horde, but things progress,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Even if you lose money, even like you get better. That's part of your character. And to do all the build up, do everything to get there. And then just because life happened or you just weren't able to be there for that session, you'd get nothing.
Yeah.
Sure, you didn't participate in the actual fight, but
Unfortunately, that's just the mentality of a lot of RPGs.
I don't really want to turn up to that
No,
game anymore.
nor would
Like,
I.
No,
But that's the
would
thing.
be,
You talked about being punished, right? Missing the game. Like, for me, missing that fight is probably even more of a punishment than not getting the XP. But then to not get the XP on top of it, it's like salt in the wound.
it's
Like,
twisted
come on
knife.
now.
It's
Like,
double.
life happened. Like, I got sick, car accident. Like, how many... You just never know. There's so many different reasons why someone can miss a session. And it is like we talk about how we haven't even been able to game as much because life gets in the way. Like, this is supposed to be a hobby. It's supposed to be fun. Make sure it is.
yeah.
Agreed. So I think the thing that we are, I mean, we're all obviously all cut from the same cloth when it comes
we
to
play
that.
together.
But having said that, as Mike has pointed out, and I'm fully accepting of, I used to track individual
I think
XP.
we've all done it. It's just one of those things.
And it just got to the point that I just didn't think it was important. And
Specifically in Genesis, you get up to 1,000 XP, it becomes a little bit hazy as to who has exactly what
That's
XP.
exactly right. You know, and sure, you can have story moments that, I mean, Star Wars does it. They say that if you've achieved a certain thing with your motivation, you get a once-off XP bump and stuff like that. I mean, if you want to track things like that, sure. But, you know, maybe have something else. Maybe it's like for the next 5 sessions, you get a free
Story point.
lightside pip or something like that. Yeah.
Well, that's it. If you're at a table and someone does something that's really cool, don't reward them with XP, reward them with a story point. Flip one back over for them or something.
Or a reroll.
Or a reroll. Rerolls are amazing.
Rerolls are great.
Yeah,
that,
I remember one of the highlights when I very first started playing with you, Ian, was in between the sessions. I think I've mentioned this like 6 times on the podcast already.
Yep.
But it was a really good way of being engaged at the session or having a cool thing because you did something extra on top, right?
Yep.
In between the sessions, if we did a write-up about what our backstory of our character, what our character was doing in between each session, just some kind of character developed in between the game, you got a free reroll in the next game.
Yep.
Like, what's to say? That was a really cool narrative moment. You have a reroll you up your sleeve this session.
Yep.
Yes, that's a cool way of rewarding your players for doing something cool without it having to always be a monetary or XP value.
You could do a very
Absolutely.
simple, a very similar principle to that. Instead of the write-up example, if you're a player who wants to drive the players to show up, instead of penalising them with an XP hit, say, hey, if you showed up last session, you get a reroll this session.
Yeah.
It's a simple. It's a good one. It's a reward, and it's like cool, sweet. In Genesis, you could do it as a reroll, or they have a personalised story point they can spend once per session.
Yep.
Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yep.
It doesn't flip, doesn't do anything like that.
Doesn't stack from session to session.
Cool. It doesn't stack from session to session.
Yeah.
So long as you participated in the previous session, you get that small bonus. And it's not. If I miss last session, I miss out on a reroll or a free story point, I'm not going to cry a river over it. Like, yeah, sure, whatever that happens.
Yep.
Especially if I know about it going in. Because I know chances are, at one point, every other person at the table is going to be in the same situation as I am, so it's going to balance out. And it'll feel less like I'm being picked on. And you'll be like, okay, fair enough, I get it. Whatever. That's if you really, really want to apply it. Even then, I still wouldn't do it.
And that person that's there every session and he gets, all the XP
Always
or whatever,
is, yep.
he's going to have a reroll every session. He gets the bonus.
Yeah.
We're not taking anything away from him.
The other side of that as well as that we were talking about before, people come for the experiences that you have, the fun around the table, right? So a reroll or something like narrative that you're adding to it is enhancing what is happening around the table, which will bring people back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's you're using a advantage to continue the drive of why people come to these games.
Yep.
Agreed.
Not just more dollars for XP.
Yep. Agreed. Well, I think that pretty much covers all of that. Just very quietly. So, hopefully, Andrew, that answers that question for you, or doesn't. I'm not quite sure,
I'm
but
sure
that's our
people will
opinion.
strongly disagree, but you know what? They can send me a letter. And
Let us know.
And I'll respond in kind.
Yeah. Yes, let us know how you handle XP and how you handle player absentee at your table? Let us know on Facebook or any of our social media. And speaking of which, if you do have any other questions like these fine folks before you, and you want to tell us what you want to hear us discuss on the show, you can send us an email to info@thedicepoolpodcast.com, or you can post your questions to Facebook and Twitter. There's plenty of great community members who will offer you some great advice, and you may be lucky enough for us to ask your question here on the show.
You can also pay our website a visit at thedicepoolpodcast.com. There you can also submit feedback, ask us questions, and just let us know what's going on for you in the world of gaming.
Indeed.
You can also find us on YouTube by searching at Dicepool Podcast and on Discord via the D20 radio channel.
And also make sure to like and follow the Dicepool Podcast on Facebook and Twitter by searching at Dicepool Podcast. And we also have our community group that you can discuss anything gaming, share your setting, and Genesis creations. Get on there with your setting roulettes, please.
Yes,
I want to hear.
Absolutely,
Yes.
yeah. And while you're visiting us on any of our social media sites like Facebook or YouTube, or while checking out other of our other episodes on your favourite podcatcher, please give us a review. It does a lot for our where we sit in when people are searching for information about different podcasts and things like that. And now that we're on Spotify, the more that you're searching Spotify and the more that you're listening to us on Spotify, that obviously, through algorithms and whatever else, makes us a little bit more visible. So please do that. We are getting some great responses from all of our different platforms. And thank you to everyone who says some wonderful, great things about the podcast. We do it for you guys. We love doing it, and we hope to continue that. And we'll have more on that probably in the next couple of episodes about some things that we have planned in that realm. I've talked about it previously, I think, in one of my videos. But anyway, it basically it really warms our heart to hear what you think of what we do, how we can improve, and what we're doing right. But yeah, as I said, we need to hear more. So let us know. So yeah, good discussion, all of about 3 hours of it. So sorry to all those people that really don't like us doing 3-hour episodes.
It ended up longer than we thought.
It did. I thought that talking about environments would be fairly like a quick discussion, but apparently not.
Well, I think most of it came from the questions at the end, to be honest.
That is true. So thanks, Andrew. Anyway, all right. Well, thanks again for listening, and we hope to see you next episode. So I think that's a wrap. I'm GM Hooly.
I am GM Huzz.
I'm GM Flano.
And I'm GM Darkfyre.
And together we are the Dicepool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away.
The Dicepool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dicepool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Dicepool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The GENESYS Role Playing Game, GENESYS logo, content and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.
I really want a cool name as well.